January 24th Village Board Work Session. This meeting is called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yes, you're in a new spot. You haven't been at this table yet. That's right, your first work session of the year.
Yes.
We have a full room for those of you at home who haven't seen a shot of the full room yet. We have extra seating and it's full, and I can see just by some of the faces that are familiar to me that the topics of particular interest to the folks who are here to observe tonight involve feral cats and the new affordable housing policy that's being proposed. So we have done a little bit of shifting of the agenda. We will begin with feral cats. We have a couple of folks here who are going to be making presentations from the SPCA and from the Humane Society. So we look forward to hearing what they have to say, and we'll invite Chief Sylvester to join us up here as well when that presentation is going on, because animal control is such an integral part of his department. And then we're going to jump down, or we're going to move the affordable housing policy up to number 2, because many of you, though you're welcome to stay for the whole evening, if you wanted to leave after that particular topic, that'll be number 2 this evening. And then we'll go back to following the rest in the order presented. Okay? Alrighty. I have a... do you have an announcement to make? Is that why you're waving your hand? Oh, well, why don't you get us started? Do you have any announcements for us this week, Rika?
No.
Okay. Please, John, go ahead.
Sure. I want to remind everybody about a music event coming up on Saturday at the Elks Lodge as part of the Ossining Second Saturday Jazz Series. The Corcovado Samba Jazz Trio will be playing at 7:30 at the Elks Lodge. They played at the Sunny Shore Rock Festival over the summer, and they also had an additional date in August there. Wonderful Brazilian music. I hope you'll come. All the door money goes to the performers, and the lodge has beverages and food. So hope to see you there. That's Saturday night, 7:30, the Corcovado Samba Jazz Trio. Thanks.
You had another announcement?
Actually, you do. Please. Yes. So normally, we talk about things going on in Ossining. Good evening, by the way. Normally, we talk about things going on in Ossining, but I want to promote, nothing in it for me, but I want to promote. There's a book written, Primary Lessons, by Sarah Bracey White. I don't know if you know her, but she's an Ossining resident. She's an African-American woman. What I do full-time is I work at a community center. She'll be speaking about her book. It's Tuesday, February 6th at 10:30 a.m. It's at the JCC in Scarsdale. I have material here, and she, in researching her own life as an African-American, went to a school that was built. 100 of them were built by the people of Sears Roebuck. I don't know if you're familiar with the story. And in doing her book, she realized that she's a beneficiary of that. She went out to college, she became a professor. I mean, she is just an amazing woman, and one of our residents. So I encourage you to go here. It's free to everybody. If you want to go, bring friends, whatever. She's just wonderful to listen to. She was at a presentation a year ago when the descendants of the people who owned Sears Roebuck was speaking about something, and they discovered each other in the audience, literally. There was so much crying going on, I didn't get any of it on video. But please, anytime we can support somebody from Ossining. So that is, I have some flyers. I'm going to just put them out there in case anybody on their way out would like to pick one up.
Trustee Herrera?
Yes, thank you. Good evening. So I have a few announcements. The first one that I said I'd say every week until March, the Ossining Emergency Temporary Winter Shelter is open. If you or anyone that you know needs a place to stay, all you have to do is go to Open Door Family Medical Center right outside at 9 p.m. and a shelter coordinator will meet you there and take you to the host site. It's a program that's been going on for the past 2 years, and it's very, very successful, and it's assuring that we as a community make sure that no one is outside and freezes during our hardest months. Once they get to the shelter, they get a warm meal followed by a warm breakfast and a to-go lunch. So it's at 9 p.m. Monday through Sunday in front of Open Door. Quick reminder, today is your last day to place your vote for Best of Westchester. I know that everyone on this board has been encouraging that in the past years, and I want to continue that as a board. We've been pretty lucky to have a lot of winners the past couple years. So you have until, I believe, midnight tonight, westchestermagazine.com. If you need help as to what Ossining businesses there are, you could ask the board or your neighbors, or just go on ossiningchamber.org, where they actually have a directory of all businesses, or in your phone book. So definitely do that. Neighbors Link is having a Know Your Rights immigration presentation and free legal screening. Due to the political climate and the change in immigration policy the past 2 months, it's actually really important for us to go over what the policies are and what everyone can do or should do in case immigration is an issue to them here in Ossining while they're in the States. That's being held on next Wednesday, January 31st at 7 p.m. at St. Anne's Church, 25 Eastern Avenue. And lastly, congratulations to our very own Skylar Jones for being named a finalist in the prestigious Regeneron Science Talent Search, one of the 40 in the entire country. So that's all.
Yes, sir.
Something to that?
Sure.
Um,
Nothing for you?
Yeah, I just want to add, for those, since you're all here, the schools do a pretty good job, especially, it used to be Intel, it's now Regeneron. So they have a wonderful mentorship program. You don't have to actually go through your school. If you have children of the age from 10th grade, they will do mentorship. I mean, they've become one of the largest employers. My daughter happened to have a mentorship, and she will be coming back this summer, now that she's a sophomore in college. Best experience of her life, and it sets you up in your resume. Anybody that wants to speak to me about it, and like how to apply and what the kids, not that I'm guaranteeing you anything, because honestly, it's as competitive as the program that Ossining has done amazingly well under Intel and now Regeneron. But just because one of our own, since I have some from it, if you need any help with your own children, neighbors, feel free to give me a call. I'm listed. And it just sets up people, especially in engineering and biomed, so let me know.
So I will just offer a little bit of an update of a pretty exciting meeting, and it's something that's been ongoing, but whenever I mention it, I'm always surprised at how many folks aren't aware of it. So I will mention it now in this forum, since folks are paying attention tonight. The Ossining waterfront has obviously seen some exciting revitalization and new things happening in recent years, and more things on the horizon. One of those things on the horizon is an extension of the dock that exists currently where the ferry comes in at Henry Gordine Park. And the design has been in the works for a very long time, and just this week we had another meeting with the representatives from the town. Debbie and I were there from the village. The MTA was a part of it, the Ossining Boat and Canoe Club, and the Clearwater, and Hudson Valley Arts and Science, which is a nonprofit organization that is really helping coordinate this effort. And so we're really excited about this opportunity that would encourage our waterfront to have more public access, improve the economic viability of the waterfront, and create more recreational access as well to the waterfront. So it's still in the design phases, but I think we got to a point where everyone at the table with their own desires for what they'd like to see or not see, they're pretty much coalesced around a plan, which was a long time coming. So it's kind of a milestone. We'll see where we go from here. All right, Madam Manager.
All right. We are pleased today to welcome up first a discussion on feral cats. And with us is Brian Shapiro from the New York State Director of the Humane Society. Shannon Lovecoff was supposed to be here, but she can't. And you're here in her place.
Hi.
Right. Hi. So if you would come on up, and we're going to invite Chief Sylvester to come up and join us as well for this
Chairs.
discussion.
This one's
We have,
broken, so.
please,
Yeah, there you
Chief, join us. We have plenty of room for you here. Do we need this screen at some point? Is that what's
So,
happening? Okay.
Yes.
Do you want to start with a brief introduction before we turn on the screen? Okay.
My name is Brian Shapiro. I'm the New York State Director for the Humane Society of the United States, which is the nation's largest animal protection organization. I'm the New York State Director, so I cover the whole state from Bronx to Buffalo.
Can you bring that mic point
Absolutely.
toward you? Thanks, so that everyone at home can hear you. Thanks.
No, you gotta.
Nope.
It's the, it's,
Anti-intuitive.
yes,
All right.
you got it now.
That's fine.
All set.
As I said, Brian Shapiro, State Director, New York State Director for the Humane Society of the United States. I cover the whole state, and I do a lot of lobbying to pass laws, good laws at the local level and also at the state level. You know, I will get calls ranging from what do I do with this box of kittens to try to pass laws to shut down the deadly ivory trade. So I'm very pleased to be here to talk about feral cats, about trap, neuter, return. I was a county legislator and a member of the Woodstock, New York Town Board for 13 years, so I know you don't have an easy job. I appreciate your service, and whatever I can do to assist, I'm here to do so.
Thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself before we get the screen on so we know who you are? Thanks.
All right, so my name is, can you hear me? Okay. Lisa Bonanno. I've been working at the SPCA of Westchester, mostly in fundraising and communications, for the last 10 years. And unfortunately, because Shannon couldn't be here, I do have the information that if anyone has questions that might come up about our contract and what that involves with the strays we take in, as well as our TNR program with Ossining. Yeah, and I have a feeling Brian's going to have a lot of good information for everyone. So,
Terrific. Thanks. So do we need some help with the technology, or you folks know how to?
Oh,
Who's
so
our
that
tech
you're looking to
guru
me?
tonight? Yes.
We're
You're
all
close.
looking at you.
You're just closest. Do you know what to do? Debbie seems to be taking charge here.
Debbie's up and
No.
running.
We're ready for you, Debbie.
I will answer no to that question.
Yeah, we have to shut some of these lights off.
That we can get. I'll get the lights. That part I can do.
That you can do.
Turn off the perimeter lights and the dais lights.
Yeah, there we go.
All right, go on. Right on.
We didn't used to. All right, so I will move around to the side here. Move over here. Except that I'm now walking. Sorry. I knew it was there. You get it.
Sure. Is it loaded into on the desktop?
Oh, it should be, yes.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, it looks like I know what I'm doing.
One of you. I don't.
No, no.
So, maybe I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks, Chief.
there you go.
Oh, thank you so much. Very good.
Look,
I hope we can reach over here. So,
Didn't ask you here for your tech skills.
no, and I don't pretend to know anything past Facebook and Google. So, as I mentioned, I'm the State Director for the Humane Society of the United States, and I'm very pleased to present some information on trap, neuter, return. I'm not going to overload the board. I did provide in email our community guide to feral cat management. A lot of the information I've taken from that and also from the New York City Feral Cat Initiative. I'm not going to overload you with information or slides, but I think you'll come away with a better idea of this practice. So the issue is the community cat overpopulation. I think one thing that everyone can agree with, and this is something that the SPCA is very familiar with, no one wants to have cats out roaming around outdoors. This is a result of people not getting their cats sterilized. The majority of cats are sterilized that are pets, upwards of 80%, and I'll get into that. Outdoor cats, only 2% of them roughly are sterilized. So they're out there, and they tend to congregate around areas where there's essentially food. What we talk about when we use the term community cat, that's a feral cat, which essentially, it's the term feral, like a wild animal. Unsocialized, they are very fearful, as a wild animal would be fearful. They're not accustomed to having human interaction. And then you might have friendly cats that would come around who are in varying degrees friendly, and might be adoptable, and many times they are. There's about 30 to 40 million unowned community cats. some of the projections go up to even higher than that, 10 to 90 million. The average lifespan of a cat in a managed colony is 6.8 years, close to 7 years. And the problem is that many of the animals that are outdoors now, the community cats, they're not sterilized, as I mentioned earlier. Part of trap, neuter, return is to collect these animals, get them sterilized, get them fixed. A lot of them will have an ear tip, so that way it's recognized and you're not trapping them again. Vaccinations, then you get into community health issues, because it's better to have, if these animals are outdoors, and they're going to be, especially if you have areas where there's food, restaurants, dumpsters, etc., to have people in the field who know the animals, have kept an eye on them, and can see if they're sick, and can see if, and know that they've been properly vetted before being re-released. As I said, approximately 2% are sterilized. So trap, neuter, return, as you can see in that little fella up on the right-hand side, humane capture using food as bait. That's a what's called a have-a-heart trap. High-quality spay-neuter. The SPCA has been providing that service. Many of the veterinarians in the area provide that service as well to the public. Providing rabies vaccination, ear tip. Sometimes it takes a day or two for the animal to recover. And then the feral cats or the community cats go back outside, because that's essentially where they're found, and that's where their homes are. And friendly cats and kittens are adopted. It is possible to socialize a kitten when it's very young. You can do so with an older cat. It does take a lot of time, and I have a lot of scratches to show for that. Where are they coming from? Again, if people don't keep their cats indoors, or they're not fixed, and then you have various generations of animals, they're out there. And in the areas where, I guess, are in question in the village of Ossining, they came from somewhere. They came from village residents. They weren't just dropped off here. So I'll talk a little bit, is community education, and that's what this is about. So the female cats can become pregnant at 4 to 5 months. They can have 2 to 3 litters a year, and an average of 4 kittens each litter. They're abandoned, or they're lost cats that are often intact. This is from the Feral Cat Initiative in New York City. 80%, it basically mirrors the same national numbers. 80% are neutered or sterilized, and with community cats, 3 to 5%, a little bit higher in New York City. They do a good job with that, animal care and control, than the national average, which we have at about 2%. A stray cat may approach people or cars. A feral cat is going to run and hide. A stray cat may answer to a voice. A feral cat is unlikely to meow or to purr, to rub against your leg. Stray cat, visible in the daytime. Feral cat, nighttime animals. When I was on the town board in Woodstock, I helped to oversee a program to trap the animals, and I was engaged in that. And at nighttime, it was like out of a science fiction movie. You would see all of these cats. It's like, what is that? What's going on? And eventually we did get that population, and it is completely under control today with the help of County Executive Mike Hine, who gave a financial support, and the Ulster County Legislature as well, to help right in the village in Woodstock. So you get a good idea of feral versus stray cat. All right, let's get into the controversial stuff. So here's I just gave a couple examples for the board to see. What you see on the right-hand side, these are, I guess, spray painted houses, shelters for the animals, so they blend in better. Best practices for caring for a colony of feral cats and neighbor relations, that's important to stress. Go through the TNR project. Keep an eye out. You have people out there looking for new cats. Respect property owners, which I know is an issue that the board has been paying attention to and fostering a dialogue. The chief as well. To feed responsibly. Provide winter shelter for cats. In the town of Hempstead, we assisted them with that, and they took all of our recommendations. And be solution-minded in addressing issues. ASPCA, also a leading animal protection organization, supports TNR, and here's an example of one of their shelters. Now we're getting into the high-tech stuff. So this is essentially just taking a bin within a bin, which provides extra shelter in the extremely cold weather. 81, now here's I think where the village trustees have kind of been on the front line, and this is just, you know, a very honest observation for someone who's been where you all are. It's very difficult in sometimes, you know, coming to consensus on these things. 81% of people would just say, leave the cats alone, and whether, you know, involving TNR, just don't do anything. 14% would say trap and kill the cats, which doesn't work, and I'll explain that, and 5% other, whatever other is. But you can see that the overwhelming majority of Americans do believe that leaving a community cat outside to live life is more humane than being euthanized. These are some headlines. This is not the only community to be dealing with the issue, so please don't feel that, you know, you're alone on this. This is a terrible slide. I decided to keep it in anyway, a little Edward Scissorhands. So there's a number of tools when we talk about trap, neuter, return to get broad public education and engagement concerning cats. And again, I thank the village trustees. This is part of that process. To educate us, so you had announcements to keep cats indoors. We don't want them getting hurt, and we don't want them overpopulating. Stressing spaying neuter programs, which the SPCA does a great job of. Shelter-based strategies, listening to your SPCA. Shannon and Ernie and Lisa are all available to assist with that. Outreach and enforcement, targeting sources of abandonment, reminding people it is against the laws, the chief knows, to abandon animals. It is a crime to abandon an animal. And effective trap, neuter, and return. Feral cats aren't suited for adoptions for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Shelters may kill them. This shelter will not. It is an issue that we run into because we're a national organization. Westchester County SPCA, if I may speak on their behalf, doesn't pick up community cats. They will work with people in the community. And trap, neuter, trap and kill, trap and relocate policies won't work. And we have heard about this vacuum effect, and it is legitimate. I'll give you a quick example. There's the Prince Edward Islands, which are part of South Africa. One of them is called Marion Island. And in 1971, scientists there decided that they were going to eradicate the feral cat population. They went about it in a very cruel manner and sprayed feline distemper from helicopters. That wiped out 65% of the population. 35% of the population developed an immunity and then quickly repopulated. Then they used dogs to track down to kill the cats. Then they went to poisoning and shooting. Not that this is anywhere in the realm of what this board is even talking about. The point is, this lasted until 1991, from about early 70s, about 1975 to 1991. And there wasn't even a way for new cats to come onto the island. This is in a subarctic region island. No cats anywhere. They were brought there from people, you know, scientists and researchers, and started to populate. It took 20 years. So you will have, if you have dumpsters, if you have anywhere where people are dropping food, homes, these are the areas where cats are going to come. That's why it's important to maintain communication with community volunteers who work in a respectful manner with town, city, and village officials. And I do have, I'll email, Alley Cat Allies has a fantastic piece on the vacuum effect. You're being very gracious with your time, so I don't want to focus too much on that, but I do have information. Feeding bans won't work. The cats are going to find their own sources of food, whether it's provided by someone who's putting down a little plate of food. I have a cat at home that was found under a dumpster at a restaurant, and he still goes crazy whenever I cook because he's used to that, human food. Laws aimed at owned cats won't work because we're not talking about owned cats. You know, some communities think we're going to have cat licensing. This is not about cat licensing. This is about community cats, which is a challenge that we all have. Wrapping it up, TNR can help public health. You have volunteers out who are aware of the cats, know the cats, are keeping an eye on them. Wildlife concerns, less cats, less wildlife killed. Animal control, we want less cats. I'm going to keep saying that's what we all agree on. We don't want cats outside. This is not a hobby for these folks. It's not a hobby for me. I wish I was talking about something else, to be honest with you. We have nuisance complaints. And I was just hearing, I'm very eager to actually come down on a weekend and enjoy the new waterfront. You know, if you have more people in areas like this, I've seen it all over the place. You're going to have more cats coming, and you're having people from out of town coming in. It's just, there's ways to manage it, and with all due respect, I think TNR is definitely a solution here. Only a couple of these, I'm not going to overload you. We'll go to 3, build strong community coalitions to address causes of the outdoor cat crisis, utilize, mitigate nuisance issues, and implement targeted strategies to bring down the overall community cat population. That's in New York City, so that's not what we want our feral cat shelters or areas looking like, but it looks like a cute cat. You can see his ear is notched, and that is my information. The board does have my my email address as well. And I'm here to answer any questions, and the Humane Society of the United States is eager to assist the village in any way you see that I can step in and do so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. AV assistance. Well, thank you very much for that.
Absolutely.
And I imagine that this is a conversation that we started having because members of the community, anyway, we don't need to rehash why we started having this conversation. We've come to this point because we really, we're trying to be constructive. We're
Yeah.
doing our best to make sure that the practices that we have in place are going to achieve the goals that you talked about here. And that means all of us working together, like you said, having a community coalition, whether it's village government, working with animal control, working with volunteers, working with property owners, so that we can reduce the population in a humane manner and reduce the nuisance and any sort of health risks that can come with it. So thank you very much for the presentation, and I'll open it up to board members if you want to start with questions, and Kevin and Debbie and Stuart, if you have comments that you'd like us to be mindful of, because you've been more actively preparing for this discussion tonight.
Well, I would like to just say thank you to your organization for the work that you do with us for the TNR, because we do value that very much. It has been managed through our office. Jamie Huffman will receive a call and about some cats that someone has found, and we do call Kevin, the chief, and we do ask for animal control to go out and look at them.
Great.
Yeah, so I want to thank you for doing that, because I do think it's a great program, and I wish we had more money to do more things, but
We all do.
anyway, I don't know if you want to talk about your organization. That would be very helpful.
So, I mean, most of the people here know the SPCA has been around since 1883, and we have had a contract with Ossining probably ever since contracts were formed for municipalities. It's been many decades, and we've had a really nice relationship. Morrow has been fantastic. I wanted to give just some general stats, since I'm not a feral cat expert. And we are very grateful that I know the town has allotted a few, the village, I'm sorry.
I just want to be clear.
Yeah, no, I know, it's two different places. Has allotted a few $1,000s for TNR, which I know some of our volunteers here have utilized to get cats in to our clinic. And, you know, just like everyone else, we're doing the best we can. We do have one day for feral cats. It's obviously, it's never enough, but we, just so there's some info on our contract with Ossining, just so everyone has an idea. And this also includes dogs. Last year, we took in 56 stray cats. Strays meaning they were out loose, and a Good Samaritan picked them up and brought them to us. Animal Control brought us 11 cats, and we also accepted 11 owner surrenders for a total of 78 cats just from the village of Ossining. We probably don't need to get into dogs. I'm not sure if that's...
Narrow
We
the
can
conversation tonight to cats.
Yeah, okay, no, that sounds fine. For the feral TNR, which is separate from those 78 cats, we did 22 spays, 26 neuters, for a total of 48 feral cats. So that's 78 cats came in that did go up for adoption, and 48 that went back out through our TNR program. So, again, I mean, that is a lot for probably one place. But Ossining, you know, we're very dedicated to trying to help Ossining because it's right in our backyard. So,
I'm sorry, could you say those numbers again? Because that was
Oh, yeah.
surprising.
and I also, they're in our the
Was it-
folders, just
is-
so you know.
Oh, okay, thank
So,
you, sir.
but and it kind of shows over the last few years everything. So for cats, strays were 56. which were picked up by Good Samaritans in the village of Ossining. Animal control brought in 11, and then we accepted 11 owner surrenders from village residents for a total of 78. And then ferals that we did TNR for, which is separate, we did 22 spays, 26 neuters for a total of 48 feral cats in the village.
Wow. And of those 48, how many of them were deemed to be adoptable?
I would have to look. I'm assuming if these are under our feral TNR, then I'm guessing most were not, or they would have been under a different category. I think those were all released, but I can definitely clarify that when I get back to the shelter.
Thank you so much for providing these numbers. These are really interesting. It's 48 is higher than it was in 2006 when it was 36. In 2015, I'm
It was
sorry, that's
73. and-
73, and then it was 48 again also in 2014. So,
Yeah. They're kind of,
Gosh,
it's a little
that-
bit all over. Yeah.
I mean, I know that they hide and we don't see them. Like, I realize that, but those are really high numbers
So,
to me.
but I can definitely find out, as you said, because we do, some of the rescues we work with, if they do come in and if we have the space and an animal, if our vet and our cat manager think that the animal could potentially be adopted, even if it's brought in as a feral, we will obviously try and place them up for adoption. It's not as often that happens, but I can definitely get those numbers for you.
Could you, maybe you said and I didn't quite make sense of it so the strays is 56, that's not TNR. But
No.
of the TNR, are those all being brought in by the volunteers?
Those
Or
are-
does that include things that Officer Santucci's or Mr. Santucci's bring?
That, I believe, is a combination of both. And so, and again, I could probably have that kind of narrowed down to see. I feel as though you probably, these guys probably brought in a majority of them that have been volunteering for a long time and also doing trap neuter release in Ossining.
We can go around the horn. I think everybody probably has questions. Go ahead. Go ahead, Rita.
All right, I'll start because nobody else.
John likes to start. Go ahead, John.
Because I'm just going to jump right in. So the, I guess, for me is, obviously every community is different, the challenges are different. There's definitely, the circumstance that happened this winter, I'm glad we're able to come up with an interim solution, but that's really what it is, an interim. So at the end of the day, I certainly want to understand the best practice and the way this thing needs to be managed in the best possible way. I also want to respect those businesses that are concerned about the feral cat activity around their restaurants and all that other stuff, and obviously any other public concerns that people have about the feral cats. So I think it's going to be a conversation. It's going to be a negotiation so that we can get all the interested parties or all the concerned parties together to find out how we can do this. Now we currently have legislation on the books which does not allow feral cats to be on publicly owned property, and obviously that's a concern. There was a verbal agreement that happened some time ago in order to resolve the problem, but that it was not really. It was sort of swept under the rug, and nobody really remembered what was going on because the people that put that agreement together are no longer here. So we're kind of starting anew here, and I think more than anything else, I think the best way to handle this is I think private property is going to be the best way to resolve the problem, I think, because as a municipality, harboring feral cats is just not the business we want to be in. To be honest with you, I just see that as a hard thing to get past. And I'm not going to speak for my colleagues, but I do agree that that's not something we need to do. So somehow we need to find other options, other ways. I realize that moving the colony, that's a whole other issue that's very difficult to manage. So I don't see us solving this, obviously in this meeting tonight. But I would like to see our village manager create some kind of a roadmap and a series of meetings in which we would try to get to a place where we can, move the dialogue along so we can get closer to satisfying, all the parties here. So that's what I'm really interested in. I'm still learning. I'm still, want to be educated, so.
Around Christmas time, there are a lot of ads for adopting. I'm an insomniac, so I watch all the late night, stuff. I found it really hard to find a good educational piece for kids and all that, because to me, giving animals as gifts and people who live in apartments is really the beginning of a disaster, right? And they're cute, they're animals, but they're not gifts, right? You don't it seems odd to me, okay? And I know for years my kids, the dog, the cats, they didn't get what they want. That would not be unusual for my kids. But, because I think it's a bad idea, but yet there's a lot of advertising and very little on your websites of educating teens about, or anything, creating internships for kids, like with both, you're a non-for-profit, right? To really go into the schools and say, and to go and do an education about not giving them as gifts, that it's illegal to abandon these. I mean, it's very hard to catch somebody leaving a little cat, on the corner, right? Or you move apartments, your new place doesn't allow pets, your old place did, and now, we have volunteers, we have police, and meanwhile, there's a budget in place. I mean, this is one of the villages that actually does have contract, as you said, for years. We've always been very good citizens about that. So I find myself sort of wondering how we can maybe bring that in a spotlight way, that maybe you guys could help with that.
Oh, okay. So it's actually also in the packets here, but just so everyone's aware, Ernie, who is our humane law enforcement officer, and yes, and our volunteer coordinator, actually do visit a few dozen schools every year, as well as host youth groups, Girl Scouts, Brownie troops at the SPCA. I think last year they did over 70 presentations between schools and having groups come to the shelter. And Ernie is a lot of times on those visits to the schools. And again, we're doing the best we can with what we have. But they spend as much time as possible. Mostly when they go into the schools, if I'm not mistaken, it is to educate everyone on cruelty and what to do if you see cruelty, and how to be kind to animals. What you're saying about, an animal.
Quite what I'm describing.
No, an animal is a pet. Yeah.
Can you speak to the microphone? so
Oh,
folks
sure.
can hear you?
I'm Ernie Longar. I'm the director of the Humane Law Enforcement. We do visits to the school, and one of the things that we do bring about, other than just animal cruelty, would be being a responsible pet owner. The SPCA also does vet each and every adoption, and if along the way we make follow-up calls, and I personally will do visits. So that's a good point, but we try to stay on top of that, especially with the younger people, and we check with landlords and such.
Thank you.
It's nice to have a dialogue with a fellow insomniac. I just want to mention, as far as, I see your point as far as gifts, giving animals as gifts, that also ties into knowing how to be a responsible pet owner. I'll send you, we do have that on our website, and we do target young people. For many years we've had a publication called Kind News, which directly targets, I think, like kindergarten up through the middle school ages as well, and definitely talk about a lot of the issues that you're discussing is about this. For our community, I'm glad this is being televised and that you brought that up. People need to get their cats fixed. If you look at the numbers, again, we're looking at over 80% of owned cats, cats being the most popular pet in the nation. People need to get their animals fixed, and they need to keep them indoors as well. I know, you can't say anything about a cat a cat should be on one's own property if you own that animal. At the same time, there's many reasons to just keep the cat inside, and this is one of them, especially if someone has not gotten them fixed. So it's good to have this opportunity so people at home can get that message.
We also do have on our application, that is one of the questions now, to see, because people don't necessarily know that that's a rule that we're not going to allow them to adopt if it's a gift. But yeah, that's one of our main questions now. And most of our adoptions at this point, because we do have a trainer on site full-time, a lot of times it does require more than one visit, so you can kind of get a better idea if, you know, everyone's really in the family on board with it and has the right intentions and understands what they're taking on by adopting. And I can also always put anyone in touch with our volunteer coordinator. She has great presentations depending on the age group she's working with. And they also work in conjunction. There's a task force for Westchester County with Mary Ann Leibowitz, who's an assistant DA, that also works on that for humane education, which Ernie's also a part of. But yeah, I mean, they at least once a week, usually for about 70 visits, or host groups at the shelter. So at least 1 week, 1 day a week is dedicated to humane education.
That's great.
And you can always, we have Camp Critter as well, that we've had over the years. That's also a great way to educate younger children. And we also have a junior volunteer program now, which we didn't always have, so that we can get younger people in and educate them on animal rescue and animal welfare.
Do you have more questions?
I'm not gonna keep going with this. I want to talk to you about the website, because if they have a good YouTube, and we have a YouTube channel, which we should have, that should be, because I wouldn't be going to any of this if I were getting a gift of a cat for a niece or a nephew. I'd be looking to see what the rules are, and we can add rules and laws and who you call on our site, not tomorrow morning on our new website, but something to, if they have a YouTube or presentation, I mean, that's an easy link.
Absolutely.
That's easy.
I think education, there's a number of components
Yeah.
that we need to talk about where we can be helpful in this process. Stuart, I see that you have your big book open right over there. Is there something you'd like to share with us?
I just wanted to correct something that was said earlier. The village code actually is fairly limited when it comes to cats. Has only one section dealing with cats as nuisances. And the problem with that is, of course, we're talking about community cats, so there's no owner. So there's no one to enforce against that. So in terms of, it's simply, a cat is a nuisance when it will injure or threaten to injure persons, injure property, upset or otherwise interfere with garbage receptacles, be found in any commercial establishment without consent or permission. That's interesting. And be kept or placed by its owner under cruel, unsanitary, or abandoned or otherwise inhumane conditions. Most of our animal statute deals either with beekeeping or with dogs. So that's the situation there. But one thing, and it's to sort of follow up on what Trustee Codman was asking about, is one of the discussions that has been going on is where the particular shelters should be located. We currently have an agreement with one provider that there are 7 shelters on public property of the village in one location, 3 behind a village firehouse. And we're trying to think of ways that where shelters perhaps could be located that are not on public property. There's the concern when you have, Brian, you were mentioning the vacuum effect, or that cats are going to come back to where they have been fed in the past. So I think one of the things that we're looking for, and I'm looking for, is where do you balance that and how do you deal with that? Because, we have a lot of areas which perhaps may not be an appropriate area to have shelters in. We appreciate all those folks who are allowing shelters to be placed on their own property. But at some point, and I know that there are some municipalities in New York, particularly further upstate, where you're not permitted to have shelters on public property or within X distance of, let's say, a school or something like that. I'm just concerned with if we have colonies in locations now, what do we do with those colonies if we're trying to also at the same time perhaps get these colonies away from public property?
As policymakers, I mean, that's the crux of the issue, is to find that balance. I did provide to the board a list of communities that do allow these shelters on public property, so it's not something that's unheard of. I think in reaching out, let's say, to the restaurant owners who might be concerned, or I know that the fire department, which is probably, I believe, its own taxing district, or are they a part of the village? No. Okay. For their board to consider. The goal is, of course, to reduce the population. So yeah, you're going to have these cats which are already there. Eventually they will live their lives, and you know, this is part of, as was mentioned earlier, this ongoing dialogue. You know, it might seem like it's taking a lot of time, but it is an investment. It's part of the community dialogue, and you don't want to have people letting their cats outdoors and not be fixed. So, you know, all I could say is you know, I respectfully, you know, offer that it's not an odd thing to have these on public property. I mean, there's, you know, many colleges, many municipalities who do have this. And, you know, maybe to reach out if you're receiving complaints from, let's say, restaurant owners or in this new district or along the waterfront, you know, the alternative is, as you bring more people in, you're going to have more cats. They're going to go where they go. They're going to go where the food is. I wish I had a magic wand for you, but it's out of batteries.
Brian, nice to meet you finally in
Thank
person.
you,
We've
Chief,
had
yeah.
a lot of phone
Yes.
conversations. Just to sort of follow up on that question. So if we have, we're talking about downtown as an area that's sort of central to businesses and surrounded by some residential area. If we were to find residential property owners in the immediate area of where the cats are now,
Yeah.
is it possible to move those colonies a short distance, say, across the street to someone's house? I mean, because as of right now, it's our understanding, based on some of the information provided by some of the advocacy groups, that wherever the cats are is permanent, and that it can't be changed. Is it possible, based on what your information is, that we'd be able to move them a short distance?
I think if it's a highway, I would have to say no. If it's
Not a
s-
highway.
Well, in this
Okay.
particular one, it's a 2-lane road.
Yeah,
Relatively
yeah.
quiet.
If that's the alternative, then I would say that's something that could definitely be looked at. And I think, in my experience, a cat would find its way over there. It would be ideal, obviously, to try to have the place as close as possible to where they are now. So I guess that's what I'll answer in a general way, as close as possible. See, I'm like a lawyer, right? To where they are at this time. But yeah, I do think that's within the realm of, especially, you know, in the past I've had to do that where we've moved, like in Woodstock. If you're familiar, it's like a village square, like right in the center of town. And I think I mentioned to you, we would use like really cheap tuna fish and just sprinkle the oil or the water and kind of try to leave some trails or like around where the food is, and that would then get them over to the area. Tricks of the trade.
Thanks.
You are very welcome.
Okay, so I have, oh, please, go right ahead.
So I just wanted to say, you know, special thanks to the SPCA and the Humane Society and also all the volunteers who have been caring for the cats in our community. I just want to make it very clear, and the board can please, you can chime in. We're taking this issue very seriously. We have the Office of Corporation Counsel, the Office of our Village Manager, our Police Department, the entire board looking into this. So it is being taken very seriously. And as Deputy Mayor Codman stated, we do hope to find, you know, a resolution that we could all move forward with. So it's something that we do hear you. We are working on it, and more to come.
So I would like to wrap it up soon, but I still have some open questions. And while you're here and while everybody's listening, maybe you can just help me fill in a few blanks so that when we get to whatever the next step is, we know what we're talking about. The 48 cats that were part of the TNR program last year, when they were released, do they have the clipped ears?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They all have the ear notch, and they all have a rabies vaccine.
Right. Oh, yeah, it didn't actually say that they were
Oh, sorry.
vaccinated.
Yes,
So,
that
but I
includes
I
that.
did want to clarify that as well. Thank
Yes.
you. So the reason why I asked that is because in part of this education for community members, I realize that if they're a feral cat, they're probably not going to get all that close to people. But if people are observing the same cat in their neighborhood regularly, if they're able to see their ears, maybe we could clarify for folks what it is you would be looking for. I know what it looks like because I've had a cat that it's had been done to, but and if it's not, then they should be contacting who, and then we have to figure out how to very clearly state who you're contacting and to do it in a timely fashion so that the cat can be trapped before apparently they give birth 3 times a year. God love them.
Four at a time.
So I think it's really important that we figure out how to clarify what we're telling community members, how they can be helpful. And one of the things is to report a stray, a community cat, a cat that's not yours, that you're not that you don't know, that you find in whatever condition, and exactly what what they can do to let us know about it. And then we have professionals that can help, or we have volunteers that we can go out to. And then it was mentioned in your presentation, you know, cats go where the food is. So if people are sealing their dumpsters or sealing their trash, then they're less likely to attract the cat. So if one of your concerns is that you've got cats that are unwelcome on your property, that one of the proactive things you can do is minimize the odors that are going to attract them. Okay. And then anybody in the community who wants to be a participant, a volunteer. There are a number of ways that people can volunteer. If you have property that is conducive to hosting a colony, you could offer some of your property, which apparently some folks are open to. That's what we're hearing, that some folks are open to allowing for a colony to be on private property.
Not that I'm aware of, I'm asking
Oh.
that if we were to find
Okay.
someone who wanted the cats.
Okay. Also volunteers who might be willing to help care for and manage a colony, they need training if they were going to trap or they were going to manage. Does the SPCA provide training for folks?
I mean, we don't have a training, per se, a training program in place. I'm sure, again, some of the volunteers we work with that do TNR and volunteer in our clinic, I know have educated people that want to help with the program. And, you know, our cat manager, who's been there forever, knows pretty much everything and anything about TNR. So she's always there to help someone.
So that person, so the TNR volunteers, some people focus on trapping, some people focus on the caring, and I've had an opportunity to meet a number of folks who volunteer in that way in our community in recent months. Is there some certification that they go through? I mean, I know we have names of people, but it's where are they getting this training from?
That was my next question. Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, I would say Susan. Liz is very good.
Humane Society course on managing feral
Okay.
cats.
Okay, no, thank you. I don't want to, there's so many people in the room. If we start opening it up, that's Susan Haywood, who manages the TNR program in Peekskill. We had an opportunity to speak, and we're going to learn more about your program and learn from your practices as well. But there's a Humane Society
Yeah, I mean,
course?
a lot of the leading animal protection organizations have certain courses, have certain protocols, and you know, and then those in the field learn how to do this and really become experts at it as well. So it really is volunteerism in its truest sense. It's not like a certification. You come away with your shield that you're the feral cat officer, but the standards are set and by a lot of the national organizations, the Humane Society of the United States being one of them.
Okay. Then the other thing that volunteers could do, and this could go down a rabbit hole, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but volunteers could offer to, you made reference to helping socialize cats so that they can become adoptable. Kittens are the most obvious, but they're not the only cats who could be socialized to be adoptable. So how is that decision made by the SPCA? And I assume that that's one of the other things that we would encourage people to volunteer for. And if somebody says, hey, I'm happy to foster a cat and help it become socialized, where do they learn how to do that, and who do we send them to? Can we send them to you?
I mean, depending on the level of, I'm gonna say feralness, you know, we do have some volunteers that foster who have been great, and we do have a setup where, depending on their level of friendliness, we adopt them out usually as barn cats. It's something really our cat manager determines when she meets them, just from her many decades of experience with cats in general, and she usually will determine that. It's really, you know, it's very hard to find fosters who are going to, kittens is one thing, but an adult cat, foster them, and it's hard at the shelter if they're coming in like that to really have enough time and enrichment to get them to that point.
Well, perhaps one of the positive outcomes from the maybe not so positive communication that there's been on this topic in recent months would be that people who haven't really been aware of the community cats, the feral cats in our community, or aware that there was a problem, but really just love animals and want to help. If you had a more robust list of people to draw from, either to take in barn cats or who were willing to socialize cats, would that change the number of cats that we saw being returned?
I'd probably have to speak to
Okay,
to
all right, it's
Shannon
something
and
that
Yeah,
let's,
no, I
let's put it on
understand
the
what
table
you're-
for conversation
you're
as we're,
saying, and I
we don't have to
wanna-
figure it out tonight, but that's,
Yeah,
but
like,
I
I
do
don't wanna
feel
stick
like
my foot in my mouth.
I want this whole
That's-
process to take
I
us
know
to a
what you
better
mean now.
place.
Yes, no,
Okay.
I understand.
And then Debbie, what is our budget? What have we spent in recent years each year? Do you know off the top of your head?
Around 35,000
A year.
a year.
To the SPCA for all of the cat and dog
Services and-
services?
Entire contract.
That's for the whole contract.
Yeah.
But that includes these
TNR.
TNRs.
I don't know off the top of my head how
Okay.
much was
All right.
TNR and how much was the
I
other,
think
but
the contract is around 34,000, and but obviously that also includes the dogs. And with TNR, I think it was allotted maybe 2,000 or 2,500 to cover those 48 feral cats. I think it comes to, in our contract, it comes to something like 365 per animal. Not for the ferals, but for the ones brought in that do go up for adoption from Animal Control or Good Samaritans.
And then I guess the one other thing to make people aware of is, and I'd never heard this term before, but owner surrender, because we really want to discourage people from moving to a place without their animal and just leaving the animal behind. But for the community to know, if for any reason you can't care for your animal anymore, please don't just leave your cat in the neighborhood, because that's not good for the cat or the neighborhood. So that, but there is this other option.
There is, and that, it's hard, the owner surrenders do tend to come towards the end of our list of priority when we have this space. We obviously, we have a call list, of people that if they know they're gonna be moving in a month and aren't gonna be able to bring their animal, then we put them on a list, and usually, hopefully, within a few weeks are able to accommodate them. The problem we run into is getting the phone call, I have to be out tomorrow, and can you take my 3 cats? And that's when we run into a space, we're a no-kill shelter, so it really depends on space. And we always keep, a certain amount of runs and I'm saying cat condos available for the village and for all the municipalities we contract with. But yeah, owner surrenders can be a little trickier, but it's something, obviously, when we have the room that, we do what we can to help with that.
So there is limited space. You guys,
For
two
owner
things.
surrenders, yes.
Owners- Okay. Well, but for whatever reason, they're coming
I
to
mean,
you or
if
potentially
Animal
coming to you.
Control were to come in and say we didn't have one space, we still would take the animal, even if it meant having to board them somewhere, or, through our contract, they would not be turned away. But owner surrenders kind of are that, I guess, a little bit of a loophole. It can be a little more complicated because it really does depend on our space.
Okay. Okay, please.
one last question. So I like the idea that Trustee Levin brought up about the website and creating, how to care for your animals and how to take care of, feral cats, and maybe having the women and men and women that help with this program, design something. But I can tell you that I did extensive research to find out how to properly take care of a colony. So what I'm hearing you say is there's training, but I can tell you there's nothing in writing.
Yeah, thank you.
And so I would love to have something that says this is the proper way that you take care of it, because that was another part of our discussion. We're being told some people are feeding them 3 times a day, but then someone else says it should be once a day, and we just don't know what the rules are. So if there's any way that you could help us with that, that would be really great for us, because I do like the idea of putting a website together for people in Austining to be able to go to and have the resources, links to all of the other agencies that can help. I was in contact with Allie Katz out of Washington, and she's just a wonderful woman and a wealth of information. Sent me a huge box, which I gave to Annie to share. So I like the idea of educating our public about that, but if we had that dedicated website, I think we might be get more people that can help take care of those cats if they know what the rules are and how they have to do it. And I couldn't find anything. And I spent a lot of time trying to find it, so if you could help, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
48 cats last year, 36 the year before, 73, 48. Most of these cats are probably still alive. The vast majority of them are not in managed colonies, right? The vast majority of them are not in managed colonies. If they're being returned to the streets of the village of Austining, we don't have 200 cats in managed colonies, and that's just the last 4 years. I know the cats don't live forever on the street, but there were cats there before all of these TNR'd.
Sorry, I'm referring to Susan.
Some people start feeding in their backyard.
Okay,
And
so it's just like an unofficial,
It's,
okay.
yeah, it's
Okay.
a mix.
I don't know what's, yeah, okay,
Kind of try to instruct them what they need to do.
okay. Any more questions?
I do not, but thank you so much for coming, and we really appreciate you spending the time with us and to help guide the Board of Trustees in their decisions on how they're going to move forward, and if there's any changes to legislation in the future. And if we can reach out to you again, if we have more questions, that would be great. And but thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you both very much. It's very, very helpful.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chief.
That's last on the agenda.
I was gonna put it last, but actually I forgot. Yeah, we were gonna,
You
is
were
it
gonna-
like a 2-second thing? I mean, is it a 2-second thing? Yeah, no, I forgot about it.
Yeah.
No, it's the Atlantic.
If it's okay, I can just present it. I mean, it's okay with me. I gotta be here.
All right, are you comfortable with them reflecting your experience? Does anybody have any questions if Stuart's reflecting his conversation with the
You
chief?
want to stay?
We put cabaret lessons at the end. We don't wanna, but.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, I was just.
Got it, Chief.
Oh, yeah, no, I wasn't about that.
Brian.
I forgot.
Pleasure to meet you.
Good to see you. Thanks. I'll be in touch.
Thanks a lot. Hey, it's great meeting you.
Oh, very good, very good, very good. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Or something completely different, as they would say on Monty Python.
Okay. Okay. Chief, would you mind closing that door? Thank you, sir. Multitasking. Many multi-talented gentlemen. Okay,
Everybody's here. Yeah.
more or less.
Great, okay, so, as we discussed in the beginning of the meeting, we're gonna move up the discussion on affordable housing. Stuart, has put together some information for all of you and, a launching point for a discussion, and I'll turn it over to Stuart.
Thank you, Debbie. I
I want to just, Tom, oh, back there, not you, Tom, the other one. So the microphones are not really working in the room, but are they working? I mean, we're like talking like we're.
We have to be like,
Go
right?
ahead, Stuart, talk. It's not really.
It's not amplifying in the room, but it is getting into the system.
You're getting
Okay.
everything?
Yes.
You're getting all the, okay.
That's good. No, I'm sorry.
You have a
Okay.
good voice, but.
Let me, for everybody, I have hard copies of the proposed revision if folks did not.
I have one. I have one for myself.
brought
so
them
could
for you.
add this one.
We're good.
I have my own hard copy. John doesn't let,
I have
he
one.
does not approve of hard
Omar
copies.
just,
Omar, do you have yours?
I do. Thank you.
I was just gonna look it on my iPhone. Go ahead.
Here, someone
I have.
Oh, you do,
No
oh,
taker.
sorry.
Thank you. I've actually asked Lynn to come up because
Oh,
if we
good.
have some issues that relate to this. Based upon our discussion at our prior work session, we've put together, I've done some work on Chapter 62, which is the village's affordable housing law. And currently, as the board is aware, it is a 10% set-aside based upon 80% AMI. The current ordinance, and Lynn, please correct me if I'm wrong, does have density bonuses. The current local law also has a definition of low income, which is 60% AMI, which would provide an additional 5% density bonus for those particular locations. What the proposal here, and this is obviously first draft to be gone through by the folks tonight, encompasses some of the things that we discussed in my memorandum to everybody. I reviewed a number of the ordinances throughout Westchester County, many of which are based upon the settlement that was reached between the federal government and the county. And if you look at a lot of these ordinances, you will note that they are all identical. They have a few tweaks here and there. But based upon the discussion with the board at the prior work session, and one of the requests, particularly that was made by Trustee Bazemore, there is a specific differentiation now between rented locations and owner-occupied locations. Rented would be, the set-aside would be at 20%, but the AMI for rent would be 60%, and for owner-occupied would be 70%. The 60% figure on rent is in fact the consistent figure that you see in Westchester County with regard to those municipalities that are in fact abiding by the settlement with HUD. They don't use 80%. But let me talk briefly about the set-aside. While there are a very small number of municipalities that have a set-aside in excess of 10%, those that do have it for limited areas, be it multifamily or in certain zones. If the village were to go to a 20% set-aside overall, it would be, from what I could see, the only jurisdiction in Westchester that in fact would have that set-aside. As for the ownership percentage AMI, the 70% is a lower AMI than you see for ownership in other locations in Westchester, where it is generally 80%. There are a few locations which have something also called workforce housing, where the AMI is in fact slightly higher, and that is also generally for looking for employees within villages and things like that. That is not what's included here. And I'm going to get to the density bonus afterwards. I'd like to just come back to that if I may. Just a few technical things. In the local law now, we refer to it as median income, but everyone refers to it as area median income. So I think just so for consistency of definitions, we should know what that is. But just a couple of things that, following some of the other ordinances here. It is required, and what you see is that your market rate housing, your affordable housing units must appear, at least on the outside, let me start from that perspective, on the outside, identical to your market rate units. Can't be distinguished in any way. That's particularly true in owner-occupied, but it's the same if it was in multiple family locations. What many jurisdictions in Westchester have, and again, these are jurisdictions which are primarily following the settlement, is a provision that interior furnishings and interior finishes in the affordable units need not be the same as in the market rate. And in fact, the language that I have put in here, which is obviously subject to discussion here, is what you see in the other ordinances, which is that interior finishes and furnishings may be reduced in quality and cost to assist in the lowering of the cost of the development of the affordable housing units. That's language that is there. I think more significant are the issues with regard to minimum floor space. We do have an 80% minimum in the village now. That is consistent with what you see throughout Westchester, that the floor space in the affordable unit must be at least 80% of the floor space in the market rate unit. Some jurisdictions tweak that slightly by saying it doesn't have to go unit by unit, but you could take the total amount of floor space, and as long as the total amount of affordable floor space is approximately 80%, it's okay. So you could have one unit that might be 62%, but you might have one that's 94%. But if you come around 80%, it works. What other locations have, and we do not have now, and I have currently not put it into the proposal, is minimum floor space for different types of apartments, be it studio, one-bedroom, two-bedroom, three-bedroom. What you do see in most ordinances throughout Westchester is numbers ranging from 600, 625 square feet up to approximately 1,100, 1,200 square feet, depending on the number of bedrooms that you have. And that number is either a number that is consistent with the particular municipality's code or is consistent with the New York State Code. Also, what other locations have, and again, it's not in here but could be put in, is the minimum and maximum number of people you can have in each of those bedrooms or in each of those units. So if it's I think it's a one-bedroom, I think you can have two, and then it goes up accordingly from that. So those are things, they're not here, but as I noted in my memo, those are things that can be included here. One thing that particularly with smaller developments in the village can become an issue, and sort of a mathematical thing. We do currently 10% set-asides. And if the number works out, let's say it's 100, it's 90 units, or, you know, we round up no matter what. That is actually not the norm in Westchester. What usually happens in most places is that if it's from point 1 to point 4, you round down. In a smaller development, that becomes important because that actually is the difference perhaps between 2 and 3 units. And if it's a 12-unit place, he's suddenly going from 1/6 to one-third or one-fourth of his units are suddenly now becoming affordable units. Again, I'm pointing that out where some of the differences are. It's not something we have a lot in Westchester. Well, the way we do it is different than is otherwise done in Westchester. Talking about density bonuses, the proposed local law does include the density bonuses that existed in the past with certain changes. What I have here, and this is where I think has to be a subject of discussion, because as I mentioned before, the current village code has a definition of low income at 60%. If the board is inclined that 60 then now becomes the new 80, so to speak, you don't need a definition of low income unless you want to make 40% your definition of low income and sort of move your figures that way, because obviously 60% would no longer be your definition of low income. It would be your standard definition. So, for example, under density bonus, and particularly where I have additional density and other development benefits, there's a provision that for rental housing in which at least 50% of the affordable housing count, rounded up to the whole number, is devoted to low-income units, which would now be defined as a 40% AMI. The applicants could get an additional density bonus of 5%. That would be an incentive if a builder is looking to put in something at a lower AMI to get himself potentially a higher density, with regard to that. The other density bonus that we have would be the same. I did include here something that is seen in the Yonkers ordinance, which is that which would entitle an applicant to a reduction in parking requirements to just one space per unit, rather than one space based upon bedrooms, to limit the number of parking, and also as an incentive perhaps so they could at least, they don't have to create as much parking in those particular areas. One other thing, currently what the village has and what every other locality has is that it is required that there be a restrictive covenant or a document which basically says that the unit must remain affordable for a set period of time. In Ossining, that set period of time is perpetuity. Other jurisdictions differ from anywhere from 30 years to 100 years. 100 years effectively is in perpetuity if you think about it. But Ossining is that. One thing, though, Ossining differs from with other locations is in other locations that restrictive covenant, if you want to call it that, does not have to be provided until the certificate of occupancy is actually issued, or at the time of the certificate of occupancy is issued. In Ossining, you have to do it at the time of the building permit. Now, there's usually a long gap between when you get your permit and when you actually have finished your building. So it's not clear exactly why in Ossining we require that you have the restrictive covenant at the time you get your permit as compared to when you get the C of O. 'Cause,
It's in perpetuity, so why would that matter?
well, even if it's 30 years, 40 years, it wouldn't matter. Because it's from the time of when when it's done. It's just, it's a difference here that we have. You know, when someone picks nits, he picks them all. So that's what I do. Yes, he does. A few other things. Something that I've included in here is that if someone is looking to build single family, most likely owner occupied, that they could locate that on lots that would meet just 75% of the minimum lot requirement, rather than have to be at the full lot requirement. So that,
Can you help us understand? Are you talking about condos now? What are you talking about?
no, if someone is looking to build, build homes in a development and wants to build single-family homes, or they can do it at less than the full lot size. They would be permitted to do that. They could do it at 75%. There's also a provision in here which is seen in Tarrytown, which would allow, there they have it as the village board. It's more likely it would have to be the zoning board, because that's what we have here, to waive all use, area, volume, bulk, land, and building requirements, in order to do, in that case in particular, relating to cluster developments. So that if someone wanted to cluster affordable housing, they could do it, and they could do it outside of what would otherwise be the zoning requirements of the particular municipality.
Cluster.
Where you, basically, and Lynn, you
Lynn,
can help
you
me
wanna-
out here.
Or if you could build across the land instead of building across the entire property, sort of, for lack of a better term, cluster them into a.
You could talk more into the
Speak into the
microphone. They're having trouble.
So instead of building your whole development across, so if you were to build, one story across your entire property, you take up the whole property. But if you wanted to preserve some of the land, it's like parkland or something, you could build 4 stories in one space. You're sort of gathering all of the units into one area and preserving some part of your property for some other
So you're
reasons.
talking about single home developments and talking about.
Well, I've talked there's 2 different things I have in here. One is, and that's again something that would have to be discussed as a potential benefit to a developer in the event that they're looking to do something. But the significant change here relates to what the AMI is. One other thing, and this goes to something that were the discussions when we were talking on landlord-tenant. In the municipalities that I looked at, virtually all of them require for renters a signed lease agreement. And that lease would be at no more than 2 years. And if the person's income remains within the AMI limits, they would then get another 2-year lease. If their income increases during that 2 years, they would be eligible for a market rate unit in the same location. If a market rate unit were not available, they would then be permitted to remain in the unit they are for 1 year. And at the end of that 1 year, they would either have to find another location, or if their income drops, they would then be in the position to be offered back an affordable unit. But I know one of the things that was discussed was whether a signed lease is required or can be required. And almost all of these municipalities require that there be a signed lease.
And it sounds like the reason for that is because when somebody comes in, because they have been designated as being within the area median income that this affordable is set aside for, as much as we want people to increase their income and move up the economic ladder, that's wonderful. But if they continue to stay in this affordable unit, then, and they no longer actually need the lower rent, then they're taking up a unit that somebody else really needs that. So, and right now, we don't have a mechanism for getting people to move on to a market rate unit.
Right, which is also why I think you have none of them have leases that, are greater than 2 years, which is what they all provide. Also, what one of the localities has is a provision that the cost of vetting potential tenants in the affordable units is something that the developer would be responsible for. That's, I think it's Larchmont is the one that has that, if I'm not mistaken. And that's, again, that's not in this local law at this point, but it is something that is, that I did see in looking at these, at these different ones. But the real issue would start with, as I said, start with, you know, your set-aside number, you know, and the AMI. And as I said, the 60% AMI appears to be fairly common on rental within Westchester County. For owner-occupied, it's generally in Westchester 80%. I did not actually see any at 70%. And again, as to the set-aside of 20, while I know Kevin Dworker referenced a few that were at 20, they were for limited locations within those municipalities. They were not across the board. So that's we have here. I did, because some folks had asked me about the regulations in Yonkers. Yonkers, for what they define as large developments, which are developments in excess of 100 units, their set-aside is basically on a sliding scale. I believe it's 40% have to be between 40 and 65% AMI, 20% between 65 and 82%, and then 40% the rest of the way. And that's something that Yonkers does for their large developments. They were the only location or the only municipality I saw that had that sort of sliding scale with regard to percentages and set-asides. But otherwise, it's, as I said, it's fairly consistent, primarily because most of them are following the Westchester County settlement provisions. So,
Okay. Jump on in.
Yeah, so I did notice that there was the that you had added in the you know, the interior finishes and furnishings may be reduced. You may be able to reduce the quality in order to assist lowering the cost.
right.
Typically, developers just buy, you know, the same refrigerator, the same stove, and just from the purposes of not making sure that they're actually like designated, like this is the affordable housing unit. In the case where, you know, someone may move out and, you know, say the developer wants to make this a market rate, but he still has to have a unit on site. So I actually think that this portion is not necessary, and I actually like the way that we had it initially. And it being distributed among 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, I'm fine with it equally being distributed. Just because, you know, it's equal, it's straight across the board. You know, I don't want a situation where someone says, hey, all the affordables are going to be the 1 bedrooms, or I'd rather it be just even, you know, even playing field, and just
So the board members understand what Trustee Bazemore is referring to is what the village has now and what most municipalities have is that the proportion of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom affordables must be in proportion as it's set forth for the market rate units. A number of municipalities have a provision that, depending upon conditions in the municipality, the planning board would have the ability to change that proportion. So if the planning board thought that instead of that you would want to have, let's say, 5 1s and 5 2s, if they thought it was more appropriate that it should be 3 1s and 7 2s, the planning board would have the ability to do that. They couldn't order that they suddenly create a 3-bedroom where none were being built, but they could change the proportion. That's why that's in there, because that was something, but I do understand what Trustee Bazemore has said, and I will certainly defer to what the board has on that, but that's why that was put in there at this point.
I'm sure you have other things, but since you brought that up, can I just get some clarification? I know that one of our most recent buildings where we had a lot of units was Harbor Square, and they have like 4 different kinds of 1-bedrooms and studios that are not called studios, and a whole bunch of different kinds of 2-bedrooms. And so it was a little complicated. How do we do the proportionality for the units? Do you have any recommendations on this front for, I mean, there ends up being some sort of a negotiation of, okay, well, this will qualify, we'll count this as a that, you know? Some of them had like libraries that didn't count as bedrooms and some
Right.
didn't, and
It was recommendations for a new process, but in the existing process, it was complex to do that particular development with the way they did it. But as Stuart noted, and as you see in most of the rules around Westchester, using that type of proportion it keeps it consistent. They were, I think, a little bit unique in how they developed it with the dens. Most of the other developments that we've had have either done 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, or 3 bedrooms. They haven't had like a 2 bedroom with like a side den and a little larger closet or something. So I think that was like special.
And with respects to density, I know when we had this previous conversation, one of the things I had mentioned is because we were asking for a greater percentage of units to give at least a slight, make sure that the density actually matched the percentage. So ideally, if under our code, if a developer was making units at 60% AMI, we would, we may give up to 15% density. I have no issue of offering that same percentage at 20% at 60% AMI. I've given up 15% density because that may better the life of the project.
I'm sorry, say that one more time?
So currently under our code, if you were developing a low-income housing, you get 15% density. What I'm saying is because we're already, encouraging low-income housing at 60% AMI, that we should, or I wouldn't have an issue with offering 15% density because we're asking for a greater percentage. We're going from 10 to 20. It just seems like.
So to incentivize people to have part of their 20 units, 20% set aside to be at a lower area median income, to provide them with a bonus density so they can build even more on every square foot of the village.
Absolutely. That's the way you want to put it, but yes.
But that's the way that I hear you.
I understand you may hear me that way, but that's not how I said it, but that's okay.
Are there any other, and that is offering bonus density is a typical way to incentivize developers to do something. Are there other measures that you found that I'm not picking up on here?
The parking that I mentioned,
I like that.
Parking, to me, is in this village an absolute disastrous situation, and allowing for less parking to be built is what I heard, which I may have heard.
No, that would.
Is a disaster on top of a disaster. That is, in my opinion, we should be going in the other direction, not only on this, on every single development that we build, because we have heard over and over again, across the board, across this entire village, that it is disastrous. And so this cannot be a part of this we're going the wrong direction with the parking.
So I would actually disagree. Most of you guys know where I stand on parking, but typically speaking, when you look at people who talk about affordable housing and housing in general, our numbers when it comes to parking, parking is very costly. And I think if we're saying that we want an inclusive community, I want an inclusive community. I want to make sure that we provide affordable housing at the greatest need. I don't think there's anything wrong with one parking space per unit. But as we start to really start focusing on where we're developing, there's going to be certain areas in the village where parking is not going to be as necessary. I know that's probably people may not agree with that, right? But when we start talking about transit-oriented development housing, parking is less needed. If you ever want to get a jitney and you want to have move people around the village, you don't move people around the village by not creating demand. You create demand by not having so much parking. If you want people to go to the local supermarket, they do that because they have to. It's about changing behavior, and what we're doing today is not necessarily just for where we are right now, but it's about where we are going to be in the future. And maybe, Lynn, you might have some ideas about parking and what it looks like in the planning world, and if not, that's okay. But I'm willing to give up that one parking space just seems okay. They're getting a parking space.
I think that at this point, with that said, Trustee Bazemore, I think it should definitely be included in the conversation. And my question goes on to Stuart. You mentioned that currently our definition of low-income housing is at 60%
Right.
AMI. And this is where it may just be me and my understanding of overall housing terminology, but affordable housing is not low-income housing.
Right. Affordable housing is not, there are two, there's affordable and then there's low income. You're correct. And then
Correct.
there's also workforce, which goes above that, so.
Because I think that there's a perception that affordable is low income.
Right.
Right. So, so I think that we need to have a discussion as to the current amount of low income housing options in the village, affordable housing options in the village, and market rate options in the village. And to piggyback to the parking is just in the past, and if I have to actually prove this, I will, but it'll take me probably a week. We've already allowed a lot of developers throughout the past 10 years build with less parking than they should, and they've managed to do pretty well. So that could have been our pilot to see how a building of 50 plus units or 40 plus units operates with half the parking that it needs. So maybe that's something for us just to look into. But I agree with Trustee Levin. Parking is a topic that our residents are very passionate about, and it's a discussion that I know that on this board we're going to be having later at a different time. So.
Lynn, do you want to offer us any of your planning perspective of what's the prevailing wisdom when it comes to parking recommendations for TOD? And keeping in mind that we're talking about 20% of the units would be set aside for affordable, the rest of them could be market rate or luxury.
Well, TOD isn't necessarily affordable housing.
Right.
Depends on where it is. But with TOD is transit-oriented development, and it's usually located near transit nodes. And the whole idea behind it is that if you're located really close to a transit node, you wouldn't necessarily need a car to do everything you need to do in your daily life. So less people would own a car in the development, so you would need less parking. It probably should be a discussion point, but there have been a lot of variances granted by the zoning board for several recent developments. How it plays out, whether or not, where the parking is, where there's availability. I mean, we'd have to look at a parking study to really assess what's going on.
Debbie, I see you taking notes. Is that because this is one of the questions we're going to be trying to address with the parking study that we budgeted to undertake this year?
I believe so. And the reason is that we really need to understand, my focus is really the downtown and the waterfront area around the train station as sort of our primary hub. But then we have all of these, what I call tentacles. We have all these other roads that take us to other parts of our community. And then how are we managing parking within those residential neighborhoods? And there have been, I have a few people who have reached out to me who have said to me, well, why can't I park on both sides of the road? It's really wide. And so I think that we have to really look at what our parking philosophy is here. And I think that if it's to encourage more parking in areas where we don't have it, I mean, we're an older community. It was built in horse and buggy days, so, not cars. And depending on how we look at housing expansion and, one family going to 2 and 2 going to 4, then you go from 1 car to 4 cars. I mean, there's a lot of things that we're going to have to discuss. But I do think that the study that I want to embrace with all of you and our community in a discussion is how should that look and what should our policies be in our neighborhoods, in our commercial cores, and then outside in our travel corridors. So that was a very long answer to a yes. But
And so, let me just be clear. Most of the stuff that we're talking about, there's only a certain area of the village where you would see this actual policy enacted. Most of it is going to be close to our downtown, and that actually brings up my next point. I had a chance to speak to a couple of people from Yonkers that I know, and just thinking about what we're doing in Ossining and where development is taking place. I would like to see, similar to what Yonkers did, is 100 or more units, or whatever that number may be, whether it be 75, just in case we don't see 100 or more units. That's where the sliding scale actually happened between the 60 and the 30, because one of the things that is like very important to me is that we provide housing for the for all our community at different income levels, and particularly where this development is happening, it is happening in areas where the property may not be valued as much as, say, in other parts of the village. And I think it's important that everyone, if you're going to put a luxury development in my neighborhood, and we can talk about Ossining being the whole community, but in my neighborhood where I grew up, there are some people who just make $36,000 a year. They're CNAs. They need a place to live, and we've done a good job at making sure that we can keep the Snowden houses and the Maple places, but we lost Claremont Gardens completely, and we need to make sure that the CNAs have a place to stay. And I don't have a problem with development as long as I'm including in it. And generally speaking, we always talk about the jobs, but if you want to afford a 2-bedroom at $17.50, that comes up to $26 an hour. And I don't know any jobs that are providing wages at $26 an hour. So what I would propose is at 100 or more units, that's where we implement the sliding scale to say, in the 20%, we want somewhere between 30 and 60% AMI. If a developer feels that they can't do it, and I'm not necessarily even saying, at 10% or at 20% or at, these many units need to be at 60 or these many units need to be at 50 or 30 or whatever the case may be. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that there needs to be some type of, within those units, representation from people at 30 to 60 at 100 or more units. And if they feel like they can't do that, that's why we have an opt-out fee. But I feel strongly about that, because the truth of the matter is where the development is happening in this community, it is not on one part of, this side of 9. It's really going to be, in the areas of Austin that have been predominantly black and brown people, and poor, and poor, yes, poor, or low income, however you want to define it.
So when we talked about this 2 weeks ago, the idea, and you had said, I said, do you want to keep it simple or do you want to have some variety in here? And now you're saying, let's have a split for anything that, whatever the threshold is, 75 units, let's say. So any development, new development with 75 units or more,
or 100, or whatever that number is, we can.
whatever the magic number is. We certainly have a number that have come in at over 100, that their 20% set aside wouldn't be 60% area median income. Right off the bat, it would be some of it at 60, some of it at 40% area median income. We're not incentivizing them to do that. We're just saying, you do that or you buy out of this limit.
If we want to, again, when it comes to bonus density, if we want to say, hey, for anyone who wants to do anything at between the 20% at 30 and 60, a 20% bonus density, we already given 15. I'm fine with that. I don't, I know your thing about density, but I'm actually fine to incentivize in that area. But however we do it, what I'm saying is that at least at 100 or more units, that we actually try to provide housing for different income levels here in our community.
At the same existing density. It would just be,
At 15,
you're
yeah,
just like, you're building 100 units,
whether it be 15.
20 of them will be for
Yeah.
area median incomes that are established, a portion for 60% area median income, a portion for 40% area median income, and we're not even talking about bonus densities. You want to do something more
We already,
aggressive?
to my earlier conversation, I said that at 60%, we should already give them 15% off the bat. So do you understand what I'm saying? Because we already given them 15% in our code currently just for doing low-income housing. Now, I'm not up.
Housing.
Yeah.
Affordable housing, right?
However, these
Because
terms are so-
it's different, right? It's
Yeah.
different.
It's an important distinction
Yeah.
because.
Well, low income in our code is 60% AMI, which we are.
But what Trustee Herrera said before, which I think is very important, is that there's low-income, affordable, and then market, and that we need to figure out, you know, what those tranches look like. And we need to understand what those percentages would look like and how that feeds into the profitability of the developer and how that's all going to work. Now, maybe we could create more incentives to, you know, if they're willing to go to 40%, you know, I'd be willing, I mean, I think 60% is where we need to be. If somebody's willing to go to 40%, then I think that's where, because we want the more, I mean, I agree with you. We need more of stuff that's for, that's for the lower end of the economic spectrum. And I think that's where we need to put the largest incentive in to make that happen. So, I mean, I've been listening to kind of where we're going with this, and you know, I'm generally in favor of it, but I think it's very important that we kind of put this all into a calculation, so we make sure that whatever framework we're creating, it's going to incentivize somebody with money to come in and do this. I mean, at the end of the day, there has to be, the developer's going to make the money, I get it, okay? That's, I've been round and round with this with developers for years, please, I know what's going on. But, so at the end of the day, let's make sure that we're setting up a paradigm that's going to be attractive for somebody to come in and
So
do it, and they're going to get what they need.
So I actually think that's a separate conversation, though, because
Well,
let me finish, John. Thank you. One of the things that we're supposed to have a conversation later on is our economic strategy and what we choose to incentivize. And one of the reasons that we decided to have this conversation now is this is right before we're doing our comprehensive plan and looking at our zoning. This is just laying down the framework. When we start to do our comprehensive plan, if we said, okay, this is what our policy is currently, this is what we said on paper, these are some of the things that, you know, these are some of the resources that we're going to need to pull in. You know, we're talking about private developers, and yes, but let's also remember that there is county dollars for affordable housing, and there is New York State dollars for affordable housing, and it's about getting all those players in the room to make some of those things happen. So I don't want to, again, you guys do have a housing calculator and everything to kind of see what this stuff looks like, but the purpose of doing this right now was to set the foundation for where we're going into. So I kind of want to.
With Madam Mayor.
Yes, please.
With that being said, I think what you were proposing, just giving the developer more options, I mean, that's actually pretty attractive, right? I mean, the more options we give a developer, that's, I think, what we want, right? So that's how I understood that. I am not a housing expert, but I have lived here, and I do walk around, and we are a small village, so I do know what exists and what does not exist. And with the exception of Maple House, which is for a particular target demographic, age range, and Snowden House, there is no other type of low-income housing. I may be mistaken. Don't quote me on that. That's just my assumption. And the rest are all market rate, and a very limited would be affordable, right? So I think it'd be pretty easy. Probably by tomorrow, we can get all the digits as to what our percentages are when it comes to those three areas, because I don't think it should be that hard to get that. So, Trustee Codman, that's a great point. We should get that and just have it, and then and that way we actually have our numbers. My other question, if I may, you mentioned that other communities had vetting by developers.
Well, actually, what I said is that in other communities, the vetting is paid by the developers.
Okay. Oh, so thank you for because I almost.
Avalon, though, as you know, does it on their own. They don't use they don't contract elsewhere. But the thought was that the vetting is paid for by the developer. Also, one thing I didn't mention, which is something that some other places have, is a specific provision that, to the extent that you put in affordable, low-income types of units, the assessor, is obligated to take that into consideration when he, in fact, assesses the property, because it does depreciate the assessed value of that location. So the higher your set aside, your assessment's going to be lower. That's going to happen.
And a lower assessment creates what?
Well, the lower assessment creates a problem because Ossining, as you probably know, Trustee Levin, is has the highest effective second highest effective tax rate in Westchester County, second only to Mount Vernon. village manager and I were up with the assessor earlier
It's a
today.
slightly misleading number because there are other communities like Armonk and like Irvington that are within, and Tarrytown even is all above 4. So I just want to say, it's not like two outliers.
No, but
It's
actually,
all very close.
but in fact, depending on which chart you look at, if you do the RAR chart, we're second. If you do the effective rate, the other rate, we're actually first. We're actually, which is not the category you want to be in.
Yeah, not the
But-
best first,
But
yeah.
the other point to note is, and if people want to know in terms of effective tax rate, to just a comparison, and I can just give this to you because this is fairly recent. I won't give addresses. House in Ossining recently sold for $750,000. Taxes are $26,709. House sold in Scarsdale for $835,000. Its annual taxes are $20,173.
Tell me the difference between those two houses. Are they the same square footage? Are they the same property? Are they
Square
the same
footage.
quality of home?
Square footage is, the Ossining house is slightly larger in terms of square feet and one other bedroom. But the tax difference is, that's a $6,000 tax difference. You know, so I'm just, that's where you see your effective tax rate. Because
okay.
if you look at that. So
So-
I just point that out. Just if anyone's interested, that's based on, this is the 2017 annual report from the County Tax Commission, so.
All right, so with respect to assessments, right, and a building being lower, typically any development that is happening in the village, the property may, say if the property was worth, raw property was worth $200,000. Effectively, once you put a building on that land, the property is going to be worth more. So I don't want to, I want to be careful how we have these conversations, because that conversation may be misleading. If a building that has affordable housing is worth $38 million, right, and then the building without affordable housing is worth $45 million or $42 million, you know, there's a difference. But again, the trade-off is that we got more affordable housing. We got housing that is meeting the needs of the people in our community. So, and do understand that, again, where the development is happening, you know, 34th State Street, that is an area where maybe the average home is worth about $250,000, where maybe Indian Village may be worth $400,000. So as soon as that building comes in there, that the property values of the neighborhood is going to rise. So let's be clear about how we have these conversations about assessments and, you know, what's worth more, or the modifications that the tax assessor has to make, because generally speaking, when we do development, the property value rises in the neighborhood.
I have a question for the board regarding the number of bedrooms. The developments that are currently being discussed within the village are 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms. However, it's my experience that a family that is probably in the income category in which you're trying to serve probably need a 3-bedroom or a 4-bedroom unit. And so I wasn't really sure how the board felt about allowing developers to have more bedrooms to be able to serve the population that you're looking at.
Who wants to jump in?
Well, yeah, I mean, so first and foremost, this year, and correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Mayor, one of our main priorities is economic development, revisiting our comprehensive plan, and part of that is embracing and encouraging young families to move here, or newlyweds to move here, or with this economy, you also see different behaviors where parents are moving in with their sons or daughters, and vice versa. You can't tell people they can't do any of that, right? Especially if you're building a community that's promoting that and setting up a model that encourages growth, that includes intergenerational of all ages, right? So with that being said, and I'll say that, you know, the big elephant in the room, right, is the schools, right? Because that's what's really been, it's nothing new. I was in a presentation, I think close to 6 years ago, where they were predicting the same thing, right? And it's still a real issue. However, we do need to have a conversation that may be uncomfortable for myself and this board and their board. How does the village continue to move on to be the village that is inclusive and keeps their people here, but also follows through with attracting the people that want to also make Ossining their home, and also how do we respect those who want to continue the journey of life and have kids and care for their mom and dad. And there's many scenarios as to why someone would need more than a 1 or 2 or 3 bedroom. And we need to be fair to everyone to have that opportunity, meanwhile conscious of what's going on. And that also means maybe an outside entity that has the ability to say what the role of the village is when it comes to its impact as a school district versus what their role is to us, and where is the appropriate line to draw. I know it's very touchy and uncomfortable, but it's something that has to be said and done. Lynn is working around the clock. You're working around the clock. This board is. Regardless of what we do with affordable housing, fair housing, we're gonna have more building within the next 10 years in Ossining, right? We're gonna have new businesses as we want within the next 2 years in Ossining. The expansion's been happening, and it's gonna continue to happen, and it's all very good, right? But we just have to make sure that we all have an understanding of that. If that all made sense.
Just one thing about the comment. You threw a lot of stuff in there about a lot of different things. I'm not sure that there was a policy set in the past 2 years or in the past month that the goal is to bring young families in here. Many towns, we do not have borders here. And so there are many places that look at senior housing because the baby boomer generation actually is a growing generations, and so many strategically, and I think you were going with the strategy of what you're looking for. It's not about people organically growing, like a young couple from Austin getting married and having kids. It's how you decide about development, and it drives people here. It drives people from other parts of Westchester to look at Austin and say, I'm downsizing from a house in, I don't know, Larchmont. And this is where you downsize to, is Ossining, and they don't need as many cars, and they don't need the school. The school is actually pretty clear that they're not interested in a strategy about bringing in, it's not the same as having children once you're here, strategically, development that involves young couples or who then, theoretically, not everybody goes and has children. So I'm not sure that that is our policy, to bring in young couples and young families. You could easily say that a policy could be, in the way we look at development, is to actually have something that alleviates the burden of the school and let Chappaqua, that now is sitting with empty space for school children because they don't even meet what they're in a decline in that population. In our neighboring towns, we have plenty of room in their school systems, including Briarcliff, should be taking on those strategies, because you can't stop people from moving around the county or outside of the county or from the city to come up here. So I think it is important to have a strategy, because development is a part of that, whether you build a whole bunch of one-bedrooms, young couple or single, I guess, professionals and seniors, right? I mean, they go for the same sort of environments. We keep going over the professional category. I don't know what it's called. Did you say professional? There is
Workforce.
affordable workforce. Thank you. I can't believe I forgot. I used to be involved in that.
But that's specifically referencing municipal workforce.
Yes.
Or particular
Which is
communities that.
Yeah. Police, teachers, fire, right? Mostly cities have more of that. Not something that we've really, I don't think.
No, I
we've
think
looked at.
like Lewisboro was one of the first communities to
Yeah.
have it. Communities that
Well,
typically
Manhattan, New York
don't
City
have,
has it.
in our area though, that don't have housing stock that is typically
Right.
accessible to workforce.
Right, so I think it is actually important. I think you were getting to that. But I don't think that we have a policy that we're looking for more young families, because the school, I think, has been adamant about the burden that they are seeing. And it's not necessarily an organic growth. It is an influx growth. And I saw that in the Dwarka study. So I think we have to actually talk through that and see and I'm not saying what my policy is, you threw that in there, but I'm not sure that we've agreed on that particular aspect. We might, I just don't remember doing it.
Just to clarify, did I use the word policy? Is our current policy to do all that? I didn't realize that I used the word. Did I use that word? Anyone?
I don't know. Look at it when you get home.
So,
So just to clarify, even if I said it's not our policy, but my understanding, there's a general and vague understanding of downtown revitalization initiative standards for the Hudson Valley and Westchester. You part of comprehensive plans, and ours has a portion that really goes into every group. The aging population, Westchester does have a very high aging population, okay? Young professionals, young couples, and if you do want to be, equitable for everyone, I mean, hey, if you're proposing that we focus on singles and somehow not encouraging kids or growth, or having this be more of a area that seniors can age in place, that's a good conversation to have as well. But I'm talking about both people.
so hold on.
Please.
There's a lot of conversations, and I could talk about the bedroom thing real quick. Typically speaking, I don't want to get into the school thing because, housing doesn't make children. People do, and I think that's just how it works. But I do want to get back to some of the things that Stuart has put in his proposed law. When it comes to, one of the things I raised was about units being indistinguishable, and not really having to worry about the interior. Is there an agreement with the
Yeah, I'm
board
with you on that.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why I'm agreeing with you on that. Because the reality is also what you said, that it won't be a fixed, number 3A is always going to be affordable and allows for some fluidity and flexibility. But the real expense for the developer is the years of lower rent that they're able to charge for that unit. So though it may seem like we're trying to be developer friendly with that, the reality is that's like a drop in the bucket compared to what the long-term expense is for having an affordable unit.
Do we agree that units should be distributed 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms? Those are one of the things that
I do, but what this, yeah, proportionately to the proportionately to the whole development. But the way that this reads, and this is section B, item 3, and it keeps what it has, and then it adds, so what it currently says is be distributed among 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, et cetera, in the same proportion as the dwelling units in the market rental housing. Then what Stuart has added is to continue to say, unless a different proportion is approved by the planning board as better suited to the housing needs of the village. And I think that actually speaks to the crux of what Debbie was asking, which is if what we have, and this is relevant to what you're saying, and I'm sorry I know I want to come back to what you were saying, Trustee Bazemore, but we're establishing our affordable housing policy, and a policy is to do two things. It's to be responsive to what are the needs that we know exist in our community today. And we know we have a shortage of 3 and 4 bedroom units for people who need them, who are in the 60% area median income or the 40% area median income. There's a shortage of that, and that is not typically what developers are going to build. So that's something we may want to incentivize, or if 3 bedrooms exist, we may want, the planning board may say, that's what we really need. So we want to be able to adjust it and bump up the number of 3 bedroom units that are in your building that are set aside. And to me, that would be the, giving the flexibility where the default is proportionate. What this does is it gives flexibility. So I'm not ready to take out this recommended additional language that's put in here.
So now we have that.
I didn't finish my policy, policy decision,
okay.
but I can go back to it. Go ahead.
So we have me who says it's fine the way it was. We have Mayor Garrity who says I'm with the flexibility, just for the purposes of Stuart, so he can know what he can go back with. Do any one of you want to weigh in on this particular conversation right now, so we can know what can stay and what can go? Do you feel? Do you have? Can you go either way with 1, 2, 3 evenly distributed, or giving the planning board the flexibility?
We're not voting on anything right this minute.
Yeah, but if
you have more questions, or you're leaning out in one way or another, and you
I mean,
want to express it, that's what
yeah,
Quanto.
and if you can agree on it, then
I go for proportional.
Okay.
Without flexibility.
Correct.
Anyone else for proportionate?
Okay.
We'll,
Go on,
we'll-
go
we'll-
on. Do you have other things on your list?
And with respect to the 100 or more units of making sure that we actually have true mixed income, is that something we want Stewart to incorporate in the policy?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Okay, so
Or,
you're
or
saying,
75? Do we?
Whatever the number is, right?
Whatever the
I
number
mean,
is.
that we decide at a later time, right?
Is there enough consensus that we want to have truly mixed income housing, whether it be 75 or 100, in the affordable housing policy?
You're talking about,
For 100 and more.
For 100 or more, yes.
you're talking about something that's similar to what they have in Yonkers,
Yes.
where once you exceed a certain threshold
Yeah.
of a number of units, there's a portion of that 20%
Yeah.
that's going to be
Flexible, yes.
flexible to the lower.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
so let me understand this.
Please.
Because you changed the definition of low income. Our current housing policy says annual household income which does not exceed 60% of the Westchester area median income as low income. And this goes back to the, kind of misleading language that, what's affordable, what's low income. And because our current policy is that the affordable units in our affordable housing program are 80% area median income, we offer a density bonus for any, right? And because the definite, we offer,
Lynn, help me, we have 10% if they meet the 80%.
right.
If they do 60%, they get an extra 5.
So the way you drafted this for our review is, our new threshold is, you start off at 60. 20% of your units are set aside at 60% area median income. So what you did was you adjusted the definition of what is low income
That's
to
correct.
now be at the 40%. So that's how we're just taking the exact same formulas that we had and saying now, because we're starting at 60, anybody who goes to 40 gets,
Well, that's actually different.
Okay.
If you go to, and I apologize, no, John, it's unfortunately not.
I'm totally lost.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, I was on the definitions here, page 2 of the proposed
That I
law.
was able to type this is one of God's great.
Oh, you're right,
Well, let me give you, here,
definitions,
he's got one, okay.
which is very early on. I'm looking at my own printout from my email, sorry, so I'm misleading John.
To answer your question, Mayor, what I had proposed in here regarding density, let's talk first density, and then we'll talk about additional density.
Okay.
For density bonus, if the person is building, and it's a 20% set aside at 60% AMI, they will get a 10% density bonus. Okay, that's, in other words, it's the same as now, but instead of 80%, we're doing it 60% AMI. The additional density bonus, I shifted because what I did was, what I put in here is that for rental housing, in which at least 50% of the affordable housing unit count is devoted to low-income units, so that would be 40%, the applicants could get an additional density bonus count equal to 5% of market rate residential. So in other words, if the person is willing to make half of his affordable units low income, they'll get a 15% density bonus.
So,
Versus 10.
for me to understand this in real numbers, some developer wants to build 100 units.
Okay.
Putting aside your proposed, just with what's on. He wants to build 100 units,
You would have to do 20 affordable.
correct? At 60% area median income.
60, that would give him a 10% density bonus, so 10 more units.
So now he's building 110 units
Right.
just for complying with our basic default law.
Right. If of the 20 affordable units, he makes half of those, or 10, low income, he gets an extra 5%.
Another 5 units or 10% of 100 and...
No, he gets 5% of the market residential units being proposed. That, I took that from the old one. That can obviously be tweaked,
No,
but,
that's fine. So, keep going.
So now he's up to 100.
120?
So now he's up to how many units?
115.
Be 115, he's getting 5, that's right.
But the 20% set aside would hold to the
20
number?
The 20, the initial,
It's,
How was it 20% of 115?
Yeah.
no, it's gonna be, it's 20% of the 100.
Of
It's the
100.
20%. It's, and the 5% is of the 100,
Additional.
it's not of the,
Bonuses,
But,
density bonuses.
he, right, so, I'm sorry. I think I misspoke in my original presentation. Before we even talk about affordable,
okay,
it's zoned for him to be able to build 100 units.
understood.
Because he's gonna comply with our law of our affordable housing law, which, let's just imagine that it's 20% set aside at 60% area median income. That same location, that same space, his building will now be 110 units.
Correct.
So he will be required to provide 11 of them, oh no, I'm sorry, 22 of them as affordable, not 20, right? Because it's now a 110 unit building, so 22 of them have to be affordable. But the extra 5% that he gets, if 11 of them are at 40% area median income, the extra 5 that he gets is only 5 because it's based on the original 100.
100, it's based on the original count, it's not based upon the up count.
So now his total number of units is 115. 22 of them are in our affordable housing program, 11 of them at 60% area median income, and 11 of them at 40% area median income. That's what you have proposed
Right.
here.
Right. Now, other places do that differently. Some, for the additional bonus, basically do it, we'll give you a 5%, but you've got to do a 1-to-1. In other words, for each one you're adding on your 5%, one of those, if you, let's say you get an extra 5, or let's say it's 6, one's got to be affordable, one's got to be, so some municipalities do that. Most, though, just do it as a
Nobody's starting at 20, though.
I know, I know, I'm not looking,
the highest in the county?
Yeah, by far.
the 20% set aside would be the highest, and your density bonus, therefore, would be, the percentage is the same as in other places, but given that you're starting at a 20% set aside, you're gonna have a bigger number. So, yes.
So what you want to do is that 100 units, that's why 100 units I use because that's what my brain can handle, but it also is one of the proposed thresholds for the larger buildings. So if we adopt some of the practices of Yonkers and say there's 2 categories, there's like the little buildings and then there's the big ones. So if 100 units is the threshold, then that building that started at 100, but because they're complying with our law, we got up to 115 units, with half of them being at 60 and half of them being at 40, that scenario that we landed at, just out of the goodness of their heart, or because they wanted that extra 5 units. You're saying that's not an option that we would be incentivizing with the bonus density, that would be a requirement for 100 unit
100
or
units
more.
or more, as far as the from 60 to 30, that's what I'm saying.
60 to 30?
40.
I've been saying 60 to 30 all day.
No, actually, we're talking about this piece, so it says 40, and you just.
Yeah, so, but that's what I was saying now. So, a couple of things. Now, what I probably should have started up with was, because we are asking developers to go from 10 to 20, and in our current code, if they were going to do low-income housing at 60% AMI, we would give them 15% off the rip.
What? What did you just say?
Our current code.
Our current code, right? So our affordable housing law right now says 10% density at 10% at 80% area median income. And for anyone who is going at low income, right,
Which currently says 60.
which is currently at 60, we would be giving the developer 15% density.
Right, isn't that the scenario that we just talked about? But with the
That's what
higher
exists now.
percentage AMI.
That's what exists now.
Now, yeah.
Now, so what I'm saying is, because we are asking for 20%, do we want to incentivize that 20% with the 15% bonus density? Everyone else except Victoria can answer that.
Okay, so that kind of goes back to the other part of the policy question that you were bringing up, which is what are we trying to do? Who are we trying to attract? And while our affordable housing policy is in part to respond to the needs of our community today, which would encourage us to see how many three-bedroom units we can have, because we know that there's a need for that, as well as 1 and 2 bedrooms. But there's a need across the board, but there's a particular shortage of three-bedroom units for three-bedroom affordable units. So we may want to find a way to encourage that. At the same time, our policies, and this is speaking to something you said from a different perspective, is our policy is, when you're talking about parking, should also be trying to encourage what we want to see happening in our community going forward. What are we trying, what kind of people, what kind of new people in our community, what kind of size families, ages, demographics, millennials. I mean, when you go to hear developers talk, all they talk about is senior housing and millennials. And they got a lot to say about senior housing and millennials. Those demographics tend to have less kids in the school, so less need for municipal or public spending, more money in, less money spent on schools, which is the largest part of our property tax bill. And we in Ossining do have we're unique among communities in Westchester in that our schools are growing and growing, and they are appealing to people a lot. I will say the affordable housing policy is not existing in a vacuum. So whatever we do, as far as the number of bedrooms, who's likely to move into them, this is one piece of the housing needs assessment recommendations of all of our housing policy. It's not the only housing by any stretch of the imagination. There are limited properties where these developments can ever happen going forward. It's also code enforcement. It's also what are we going to do with our comprehensive plan with multifamily dwellings that are much smaller than what are going to be largely impacted by the affordable housing policy. So as we speak about this, I do have a reaction when you say, when what you're saying, I don't know if people are hearing it. What I'm hearing is, how many people can we build housing for on every square foot of land in the village of Ossining? And there are absolutely properties where our community would benefit from having them developed in a positive way, including housing that meets the needs of our community, including housing that encourages our community to grow in a way that's going to help our economic development. But I don't think maximizing the square footage to fit in as much bonus density in each case.
So
I'm not you at every step are looking for more and more bonus density. I'm not with that.
My thing is not how much to build in every single square footage of the village, because that's a true hyperbole. My thing is, we know where development is likely to happen, and it's going to happen. Main Street, Spring Street, Water Street, right over there by the train station, State Street. Like, that's where it's happening now.
So does it happen because, okay, so let's say, putting aside how many people move in with families and with kids, and put that aside because that is a complicated piece of it. But right now, our buildings in downtown can be first floor development with 3 stories above it or 4 stories above it?
I believe it's 4.
Or multi-use?
4
4
total.
total, so first floor plus 3 residential above, or 3 whatever, it could be upstairs offices. So that can only go but so high to be within our current zoning, which could change. And there was a proposal that was presented a few years ago for the Market Square properties that had a 7 to 10 story building, and some people were okay with that. A lot of people were uncomfortable with that, feeling that it was incongruous with who we are as a village. So when do we reach, like, are we setting ourselves up with this much bonus density that there's no way for that bonus density to be accomplished in our zoning codes? Or do we reduce because we also have a minimum size for our studios, 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms. Do we reduce those requirements rather than allowing it to grow up?
So here's my thing about reducing the floor space requirements. Again, we're talking about one of the things there's a lot of conversations that have been having as far as 1 and 2 and 3 bedrooms. Like, that's separate from this conversation. But when it comes to, like, minimizing units, like, one of the things I want to say is, like, you can't have a 2-bedroom apartment the size of a one-bedroom apartment, because the people that we're talking about, right, like they need places to put their stuff, right? So it's one thing if you're doing a total micro units thing, micro units, and micro unit is fine for someone like me. Me, Omar, we could do micro units. It's just us. But I don't want micro units for like families, because like that's not how people operate. You can't even.
Talking though that it would be, you're talking about a new development in relation to the market rate. So didn't we just talk about, or is this what we're talking about?
No. So what was said earlier was that our current code says 80% of the floor space for affordable housing units. With respects to height and density, again, we are going into our comprehensive plan. Those are the times to have that conversation. What I'm saying, particularly with this density, is we are asking for 20% set aside, right? To me, if you want to actually have the development happen, there should be no reason that we not offer slightly more density. That's what I'm saying. Because with respects to where this development is going to happen, right, whether it be in the downtown area, that's more units. More units means more people that can shop and be in
I get the economic development cycle, and it's all good. It's all, I get that.
So if you're asking me the difference between 105 units and 115 units versus 130, that's 15 more units, right?
And that's where there's enough flexibility. You're saying when you're talking about development, that is that big. Whereas when you're not trying to encourage that density on a 30-unit building where an additional 5% is significant, and it's harder to cram that in.
The whole thing was 100% of.
Okay, so
Yeah, but you differentiated that. So is it the Yonkers model? And God, the idea of even thinking of Yonkers as a model for anything makes me really angry. You heard me. I travel in Yonkers all the time. I don't think it's a good model for a whole bunch of reasons. Pavement after pavement after pavement. So the density that you're talking about is over 100 units? Or are you saying proportionally, regardless of the number of units in the building? That's why I keep seeing.
So what I'm saying is that just in general, one of the first questions I asked was, do we have a problem, instead of it being 10% density, of going from 10% to 15% off the cusp, because we're asking for a greater amount of units at a lower percentage AMI.
For any size building?
For any size building.
25 units, 35 units, it wouldn't matter.
15% instead of 10. That was my first question on the floor.
2 weeks ago, I said, you just want to go simple? You said, yeah, I just want to go simple. And you are,
yeah, but I also said that. But I also said 2 weeks ago that the density should match proportionately what we're asking for. I didn't expect it to be the same exact thing, because I knew that we were asking for a greater affordability.
And our legislative process, you learn. You know.
It was a great argument, to be honest with you. It was like this whole thing that we sat here and went through. It was a very logical way to look at it, actually.
So, Stuart, just for the sake of time, there was at least 3 people who agreed with 40 to 60 or 30 to, actually I said 30 to 60, as far as 100 more units. So that might be something you might want to incorporate in this right here. Now the question is the bonus density.
What did 40, 30,
Okay.
what did you just hear? What's your next step with that?
What Yonkers has is that for 100 units or more, on their set-aside, 40% of the units must be between 40 and 65% AMI, 20% between 66 and 80 AMI, and 40% between 81 and 100% AMI. That's the Yonkers floating.
Like
So
a sliding, that's what
sliding.
you're referring to,
That's
the
what I was
sliding scale at 100 units or more.
Right.
Is that what you're arguing for?
I'm
That's my
arguing for
understanding.
30 to 60% on our sliding scale for 100 units or more, because we're primarily dealing with rental housing. I'm not asking to build housing for people at 80% or 120% of the AMI in our affordable housing policy. I'm particularly primarily talking between 30 to 60. There were 3 people who agreed that we could kind of incorporate that that initiative into the policy.
Who are the three people? You?
You-
Victoria, was that you, the 30?
Well, you were
was that
drinking-
John, or
you were
Omar?
drinking the
I
coffee.
don't know who agreed.
What?
Yeah, I mean,
Did we,
Yes.
for 30% at,
Well, the sliding, so from 30 to
To
whatever.
60,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
so, John, that was you, Omar, and.
Myself.
I got that. You suggested it.
Okay, so I guess we're at some narrow differences here right now with the we're talking about maybe 3 developments ever in the future that would be at the 100 or more. I mean, just because there's not that many properties that can really have
Yes.
100.
Thank you for saying that, by the way.
So I don't want to inflate the exactly what we're talking about here. What is our next step in this process? Whether we do 30% AMI of 50% of the set aside of the large buildings or not, and what is our next step in this process? Because the goal was to get this done early on, so that when we're doing the comprehensive plan review, we know what we're talking about. Because if we're going to change zoning regulations in various neighborhoods in our community, we should know what sort of affordable units are going to be included in here. So, what is our next step in being able to move this forward so we can continue?
The next step would be to provide another draft based upon the discussions tonight. Looking up, one of the things, Mayor, you said, are there other types of incentives that can be offered, which is one thing to look into. Trustee Herrera asked what the percentages might be in terms of the village, what we have low versus affordable versus market rate. But to develop that, in addition to revising what I brought tonight, I would also present to you a revision of the rules and regulations for affordable housing, which this village has, which are referenced in the code, but are not actually part of the code. I have a revision here, but there's language that has to be changed based upon what the discussions are. So I think the next thing would be for me to go back, as Warner Wolf would say, look at the videotape and listen and see exactly where we are in terms of all of this. Put something together so that it can then be presented again to you folks. Because I don't know if there's I know we talked 30, 40, 60, I don't know exactly what percentage we're at, particularly with under 100 units, because in the proposal it's at 40 as low income. I don't know if we're changing the definition, because I guess still one of the issues, and I know where the board is with this, and I know we have the economic issues as well, is do we know, and does this board know, that developers are going to see these numbers and go, oh my God, I mean, but that's a policy decision from your end. From my end, I have to go back and basically rework this to take the various suggestions that you folks had here and come up with a new draft of this and a revision to the rules and regulations, so I can present those both to you.
Thank you. Please, Debbie.
I would also say that I'll work with Stuart to put a spreadsheet together, because I think that where you were going, Mayor, with, okay, I have 100 units. This meant, so 80 units will be market and 20 will be affordable. And from that 20, 10 will be at this rate and 10 will be at this rate. So I think that we can put some different scenarios together that I think may help some of us that maybe not, like, I have a really hard time understanding this. I like spreadsheets, but I'm a numbers person, so I'd like to present that with you. And then we can also sort of marry that with the size of the units too.
Oh, thank you. And you are a numbers person, and you do analyze and dissect them very well, and I appreciate that. I'm a former middle school math teacher myself. But if you could help us, and I know we have at various times looked at what are AMI numbers, because the area median income numbers that we have to work with are Westchester County, which are different than if we actually had local area median income numbers. So 100% area median income is right at the very middle. If you lined up the income levels of everybody in Westchester County, the person in the middle is at the 100% area median income for Westchester County, and those are the numbers that we're using. That's what everybody uses in the county. So if we're talking about currently the people who are 80% area median income are actually, at the, if you look at the whole spectrum, they're 40% along the line. So if you're looking at the people that we're talking about now, which is the people at the 60% area median income, they're 30% along this line, with the very wealthy people way over there. And then we're talking about the people who are at 40% area median income, they're 20% along the line, and 80% of the population has an income further along the line. So, and that changes for if you're an individual, if you're a two-person family household, or three-person. So if you could help us know what those numbers really are, so that we can think about who are the people in our community, what does somebody who is a teaching assistant in Ossining schools make, and what are they going to be able to afford in our community? I'd like to put this into human terms for us. I think that would be helpful. And then the next thing is what Stuart was starting to talk about, and this is but really for you, Debbie, because one of the other big programs, the initiatives we have this year, is an economic development strategy. Right. So however this looks in the end, it will be the most progressive affordable housing program in Westchester County, and that's great. And that really supports one of our big picture goals when it comes to affordability of housing in Ossining. But having a policy that nobody will take advantage of, and therefore it discourages development in our community, where we've seen some really some invigorated investment in our community in recent years and on the horizon, and we don't want to discourage that. So when we're talking about what is our economic development strategy, this has to be something that is seriously considered. How are we going to make this a reality? How is our economic development strategy going to make this a reality? Because we're now unique in Ossining, in among other communities in Westchester County, if we have this affordable housing program, because we have twice the requirement, at least, than almost every other community. So if we could keep that in perspective. We need to, that's what we kind of want to get this done, because everything else is going to be impacted by this policy. Okay. All right, can we take a quick break? I imagine some folks may not want to stay with us. Are we all good? I think we've gone around in a lot of circles here. Okay. All right, thank you. We're going to move on, and then we'll come back. Welcome back. So next up is budget modifications.
Hello.
Ms. Debbie.
Oh, okay.
Move us
So
along.
I'd like to introduce Tom Warren. He's going to, when we had our budget discussions this year, we talked about purchasing some capital equipment out of 17 funds. So this is to give you a heads up on where we are with that, because we will need a resolution of support to make that.
Great.
So Tom, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of the Board of Trustees.
Good evening. Thank you for your patience.
Can I just make sure I'm looking at the right document here?
I actually submitted two memos. One was, I think, sent out Friday. The subject is budget modifications for 2/7/18 regular meeting. And it says, you know, it starts off as you start to close the 2017 accounting records. And this memo was also in conjunction with when we were first meeting with department heads, and they were submitting their budget requests for 2018. Some of the items that they included in their capital plan requests, which were relatively small, we asked and proposed that they find the money in 2017 to make these purchases now instead of putting them in the 2018 capital plan.
So we didn't have to add it to the levy for next year.
And plus, we wouldn't have to also issue debt. At the time, we were thinking about issuing debt.
Right.
And as the manager had indicated, and as we discussed throughout the budget process on the capital plan, our intent this year is to use fund balance for all the vehicle purchases in 2018, as well as some of the other items that are in the second memo that I'll be discussing. But you know, the first thing I wanted to do, because of these year-end purchases, you know, we didn't have the appropriation in the budget because we didn't actually make the budget modification to make the appropriations available, and we were also had some extraordinary and unusual items and expenses during the year that need budget modifications as well. So the manager asked if I could take care of these sooner rather than later as we work to close the 2018 accounting records. First item was the police department. The chief had asked for about $37,000 worth of equipment needs that I'd itemized in the memo here. He identified the available monies in his 2017 budget. So he's taking care of that. At the bottom of the page is the expansion tank for the boiler for this building. That seems to be the fix to help fix the heating problems here in the building. That's about $14,800, and I identified the monies to help pay for that. Most of it came from the savings in the auditor contract this year with the new auditors. Also in the Parks Department, and we discussed this during the budget work sessions, we had some large expenses for the Sing Sing Killway walkway. We had to purchase over $10,000 worth of replacement railings and additional supplies to keep on hand to repair the railings if needed. And so there wasn't enough money in the budget for that. Due to vacancies in the Parks Department during the year, there are sufficient appropriations moving it from the 100 line to the 400 line in the Parks Department. And in the Recreation Department, the manager had discussed during the budget work sessions about wanting to increase the expenditures increase the appropriation for repairs and improvements in the facilities. And this here is an example of some of the problems that we had in 2017, where the budget wasn't sufficient for some of the extraordinary expenses. Plus, we also have a service contract to help us maintain some of the equipment there.
Is it 432 you're talking about, the 7?
Yes, in the 7140 recreation budget, the 432 budget line, which is repairs and maintenance on buildings and grounds at the community center. And there isn't any extra appropriations within the recreation department, so the proposal was to use the money from the mortgage tax revenues, which I did want to talk about mortgage tax revenues since we didn't have a department head report in December. I didn't get to update you on the mortgage tax revenues, and we also got the sales tax revenues this week. So after we get through that,
Kinds of good news.
I can mention that quickly. And the second item in the recreation department was the new program for the Arts Center. With that building open and operating, there was about $40,000 of program expenses, and we had revenues of $19,000. So I wanted to modify the budget for those items, with a difference coming from mortgage tax revenues. And in the water, yes?
Do you want to finish and then we'll ask
No,
questions,
if you have a question,
so
we can
did
stop.
we just misbudget that because something new we should have known about I mean, it's one thing about things breaking. Look, I get that. Equipment, I get all that, but how did this is programming? I mean, you're rolling out programs. They're supposed to
I
have a certain
didn't
number of people.
know when the Arts Center was going to open, and because it was a town building, I initially thought it was going to be a town program. It actually is a village program, being, in a town facility.
And that's consistent with the IMA, because we do the programmatic stuff. So
Who's looking at the IMA? Remind me?
That guy. Me and Omar.
that's how it
Yeah, so,
I
so,
understand. That's why I'm asking the question. I'm a little bit.
the programming at Cedar Lane Park is new. Historically, all of the recreation programming, as the IMA is structured, is organized and managed by the recreation superintendent. Most of what happens in town parks is like soccer games and baseball games, and it's all part of one big schedule. Whether you're a vets or you're a rider, it's all part of one big schedule, and that's the programming that's there. Or like the Easter egg hunt, they do one in Ryder Park, they do one in Nelson Sitting Park. It's all the same programming, and it's all handled by a recreation superintendent. This arts center is like a whole new animal that the IMA never foresaw, and it does need to be a conversation. So it's not surprising that you didn't anticipate that it would look like this, because it was kind of like, wow, what the heck is this thing? How do we make this work? It doesn't fit in the current structure.
Okay, and in the water fund, we had one judgment to pay out this past year for damage pertaining to a water main break, and that was $25,000, and we only had $5,000 in the budget. We usually don't have, you know, a lot of judgments and claims in the water fund, so that needs to be addressed. And also the property taxes that the water fund pays on our water properties was overexpended. I think due to the reval and the value of the buildings up at the Indian Brook were actually increased more than what they might have been if the reval hadn't occurred, because I do recall we had a meeting with the assessor and their outside appraiser to talk about the value of the properties. So I guess in retrospect, I'm not surprised that the taxes were a little bit more than what we had budgeted. And I think finally, in the water department, they actually asked if they could advance two of the capital purchases that were in the 2018 capital plan. They wanted to buy the forklift since they had the contract available, and having the forklift would help reduce possible injuries due to moving heavy equipment and materials around. And also they had a contract to piggyback under for the Vector excavator, and I think that contract was going to expire at the end of December, so they wanted to make that purchase at the end of 2017 with a purchase order, and they did provide the appropriations within the water fund. So the action item is a budget modification for the next legislative meeting in 2 weeks to balance the budget for these items, to move some appropriations around, and to appropriate some surplus revenues.
Those are the two water transmission and distribution equipment and vehicles, right? 201 and 207?
Yes, yes.
I hope that this time next year we do not have extra money, because we do not have enough personnel in the community center. I know it sounds like that's a good thing to have as extra money, but I hope we do not have that. Please.
Nobody hopes that more than Debbie.
I'm all for it.
So I just wanted to touch base on the mortgage tax revenues. We have been averaging about $200,000 a year, and it had actually started to decrease a little bit. Never did fully recover after the recession, so we budgeted $150,000 for 2017, and the first payment in June was almost $214,000, which was $100,000 more than the payment the year before in 2016. And so we were waiting for the December 2017 payment, and that was more than $146,000, which is about $32,000 more than the payment in 2016. So altogether, for 2017, the actual revenues are more than $360,000, and we had budgeted $150,000, so there's an extra $210,000 on the mortgage tax.
Nice.
And on the sales tax, I'd actually,
Sorry, go ahead.
I had reported to the board about that third quarter 2017 sales tax revenue as being 11% higher than a year ago. And the December fourth quarter number just came out this week from the county, and that was 2.29% more than a year ago. So for the entire year 2017, the sales tax revenue is more than $3.8 million, and we had budgeted $3.625 million. So there's almost $200,000 extra revenues for the sales tax distribution. altogether it was about 4.5% higher than the 2016 number. And it had been basically flat for the couple years prior.
Yeah, the sales tax number is kind of mysterious, and we have very little control over it. That's distributed by the county.
Right.
So why did it go up by 4.5%? Do we know? Is there some way that is there some magical way for us to influence it that I don't understand? Because I like the direction it's going in. I just is it just what the county took in total, and it's our same percentage? It just happened.
It's taken in by the county, and it's allocated, except for those cities that preempt the county and receive the sales tax revenues directly. The rest of it is allocated based on assessments. I remember a couple years ago when the sales tax revenues went up, it went up because of the price of gasoline going up. And so therefore there was more revenues. I know that the price of gasoline had come down in 2016 and I think in 2015, which affected the sales tax distribution. But I haven't seen any press releases talking about sales tax revenue, but I can certainly look to see if there's anything from the state.
Well, I'm not trying to change the direction. I was just sort of wondering how it was going in the right direction, but I realize it's largely out of our control other than but our assessed values went up, so maybe that's reflective of the reassessment and the fact that we're 100%
So is
valuation.
sales tax based on population?
Well, you just said it was the assessed values.
Mortgage tax is based on sales, yes. Yeah, all right, so the sales tax is based on the assessments.
The assessments, yeah. The property assessments went up, so it makes sense that our sales tax revenue went up. Okay. And I just want to say, like, you guys did exactly what we asked, which is we didn't expend all the money that had been budgeted in 2017, even though we had a 0% tax rate increase in 2017, and some of it is because there were unfilled staffing positions, but that wasn't it. And what is, what you're more often, your problem is that people are going over budget and our departments are not going over budget, and partly it's because they're not paying some of the staff that we wish they were paying, but that's not the only thing that you're seeing, I assume, Debbie. Okay, so this is all good news, and we took on less debt going forward? Because we're using our 2017.
Based on this
rather than putting these into borrowing for them?
On the next memo that, I think I saw an email that it went out this afternoon, or was that yesterday? I'm not really sure. But there was a second email that actually puts into place the ideas and requests and approvals that were in the capital plan.
Is this the board resolution?
Board resolution to establish capital projects and budgets for 2018 capital plan purchases. That was the subject line.
Yeah, we have that.
When was that? No, what?
I don't know. I don't want to close it.
I thought I saw it come through this afternoon.
Oh, this
Or it
afternoon?
might have been yesterday.
Yesterday.
It was one of the attachments that Jamie sent to us. Okay. We have staff that are here in the room. Are
Here it
they?
is. I've got it.
Yes, I actually, after I went through this, I'd actually asked Paul, you had mentioned departments staying within their budgets, and while I was working on this memo for the items that were in the capital plan, Paul was also looking at his budget, and I have to believe that the DPW and central garage budget will be probably $200,000 less than spent versus what was appropriate in the budget, $200,000 savings. So Paul's been wanting to address the board to see if that money could be reallocated to buy a replacement vehicle.
That we didn't we already say that, to do as much of that as possible? Isn't that?
I don't think it was known at
Well,
the time.
that one wasn't specifically discussed. There were things
Oh,
in the
okay.
capital plan, and with the savings in the DPW budget, Paul was hoping to take a vehicle that might be in next year's capital plan and replace it now, specifically to replace a vehicle from the 1990s.
So
Did you want me to go through this list quickly with you because
Okay,
I
I'm sorry,
did
I
have
thought
a
we had.
comment.
Please, go ahead, Tom. We're here to hear
On
from
one
you.
of them. Included was the fire department command vehicle bus. That was $65,000. And the comment was that the chief was not able to identify this equipment on any contract that he could piggyback under. So
To go out to
the administrative assistant in the DPW has been working on drawing up bid specs, and they would like to be able to have a resolution on the legislative meeting, the first meeting in February, to authorize going out to bid for this vehicle. And then there was the police vehicles,
Before you move on, was that one of the vehicles that we had said use the 2017 money to buy?
Yes.
Okay, so 2017 money was earmarked for that and will not be used for that because they're going out to bid now, so we're not, it's gotta be 2018 money.
Well, this resolution actually takes money from the 2017 budget and transfers it to the
Oh,
capital
okay.
fund as of December 31st to spend from the capital fund in 2018. It's too late now, because it's the end of January. It's too late now to start issuing purchase orders for these items. But we did, with this resolution, we are transferring the money out of the general fund to the capital fund to issue purchase orders in 2018.
Got it.
Okay, so there's also the police vehicles and the animal control van. The Parks Department had requested 3 pieces of equipment totaling $60,000. The Fire Department roof repairs for $60,000. The comprehensive plan update for $150,000. And also at the community center, the relocation of the air conditioning chillers and to repair the pad roof for $125,000. So that was a total of $651,500. And also the water department had requested a 4x4 utility truck.
So the roofs, my thing about energy and all that. So I know we discussed all this December, right? So none of this is new per se. So when we do new roofs, did I shut it off? I'm sorry. I'm okay. So roofs, when we do firehouses that we own, buildings that we own, I would like to understand what the possibility of either solar or green gardens to save energy over time, not just to redo roofs. And Paul is coming up to the mic. Are you here to discuss that, or no? You're just coming up to the mic.
I can if you'd like me to. Tom called me up.
I just want to know if that was taken into consideration and it was a yay or nay on those 2 roofs. Because in 5-6 years, you have a break even on all these things, and then the village saves lots of money, and it's better for the environment.
So you're asking, are these just like, minimal
we just
roof?
repairing,
Is
like,
this just minimal roof repair, or is the roof gonna be strong enough to be able to actually
think about this,
be
yeah.
something more than just keeping the water out of the building? I don't know if you're ready to talk about
I don't know the answer to that, but I'm pretty sure it was a collective roof repair in numerous firehouses that did not take the solar option into consideration there.
Collective, so it's not one.
But I'm not for sure, but I'm sure we can follow up on that.
I thought that when we had our tour of the firehouses, they kind of identified those roofs that needed work, like 21 State Street, where the rocks were like too heavy for the roof, and so that needs to be, the flat roof, that needs to be repaired.
It's repairs.
So it's just
It's not a
basic,
brand new
yeah,
roof.
that amount, if it was one roof, sounded like a real amount. Now that you're telling me it's a bunch of roofs,
All over the place.
that's basically gluing, okay, all right. Going forward, like when you're doing this stuff, as you're going through the, I'm gonna speak to Trustee Codman soon about it too, I wanna take a tour. I really wanna look at the buildings that we own and start really having a serious conversation about solarizing or green gardens.
Yes, I actually met with a consultant today to start that conversation.
Okay, thank you.
So I asked Paul if he could request that this resolution be modified to add one more truck. That he's going to fund with savings in his 2017 budget.
Thank you, Tom. So, with me tonight, I don't know if all or some of you have met him, but it's John Fiore. He is our central garage mechanic, and he's been keeping us on the road since '09. early in '09. So if I may take the liberty to get at to how we get to some of these savings every year, I'd like, because he did sit here with us all evening, to present some numbers to you so you can get a better understanding of why we do what we do, particularly at the end of the year. We appreciate the opportunity to spend some of our savings. It's not the first time we've done that. We have spent money to defer money or to keep money from going into our debt service, so again, we appreciate that. This particular vehicle we want to purchase is a dump body vehicle that is going to be able to be a multi-use, to do utility excavation assistance, snow removal, recyclables and metal removal, as well as an operating truck for our daily operations when it's eventually fitted out with snow equipment. The total price, which we did piggyback, this is not an administrative bypass of the procurement policy, we piggybacked the Onondaga County contract, and so we satisfied procurement policy with that, and it's $124,000 total cost. Let me take a step back before I get into that, because some of the other things Tom discussed that I think I can expand on a little bit for clarification. The forklift, sure, makes things safer, but the forklift at the operation facility is a great asset for us, because right now the only way we unload heavy deliveries, which we do get a lot because we run all our departments out of there, central garage, water, and highway, and a lot of them come on a skid steer, and it's a little inconvenient sometimes to wait for an HMEO to get on a machine and put the skid on the skid loader on there, and the truck has to wait. If there is a forklift there, and we train a few of the people that are there routinely to run the forklift, we can unload a truck whenever it comes. So that was really the main premise for it, and we did buy that off of a existing contract. The vac excavator replaces the old vac excavator, which I believe Andy bought for his crews. It's not that big vac excavator that we talk about sometimes that goes along with the catch basin cleaning. It's a smaller one that they use around a lot of the curb boxes and what have you in the water department. So that's a very useful tool when those guys do that work, and it's really a trailer mounted unit that gets a lot of use. A lot of preventative maintenance is done with that. Dave is almost done with the bid spec for the fire department that he's working on for the bus, so that will be bid out accordingly. The railing comment, I will tell you that the replacement railing in excess of $10,000 is a drop in the bucket compared to what would have happened if the trees that broke those railings would have had a free drop at the existing sanitary line that sits underneath the structural concrete. So I'm happy to see those railings breaking, because that's what they're designed to do. But I could tell you that the concrete underneath the railings, in the 3 instances that has happened since we encased that in concrete, is unscathed. So that project has paid for itself as far as I'm concerned 3 times already. And to append what Trustee Levin said about spending the personnel savings, yes, that was a large part of the savings this year, but it wasn't all of the savings there. And this is what I'm going to use that as a segue into touting John a little bit here. He started in '09, and I had known him prior to coming over here, and he's in the private sector, so we had an excess of $200,000. You know, this is going to exclude personnel costs, because that obviously has the union escalation, but in materials and non-personnel costs in central garage budget to maintain all the rolling stock, keeping in mind that John takes care of all the rolling stock, not only in DPW, but in all the other departments, and has added the fire chief's vehicles and the other vehicles up there.
Except the fire apparatus.
Except the apparatus, yes, that's a different animal.
But including rec and including police?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, so he started in '09, and prior to him coming over, we spent in excess routinely of $200,000 a year just in that, just in the maintenance. When he came on board in '09, we had come and asked for a budget of $160,000 with the promise that he was going to bring in his efficiencies and procurement know-how in the private sector into here. So in '09, he started out with $160,000 in the budget, and he met that. The following year, he knocked that down to total expenditures of $151. A year later, he knocked it down to $139. A year later, he was down to $138, $135. 135 again, so you can start to see we're getting it, you know, there's plenty in that 5-pound bag, and we don't want the seams to break. And then that following year in '15, we had a couple of major equipment failures, which is right around the time we started buying a lot of equipment, and we spent 172. But considering that's 10 years later, compared to the 160, that's still pretty good. And then last year in 16, we spent a total of 150 because we were back down again because we started to get the benefit of some of that new equipment where we don't have that much of preventive maintenance costs. And this year in 17, he's on track to be at 160 again. So I think it's really, he deserves all the credit he gets from that I'm going to give him right now for spending in 17 the same amount that he spent in 09 in the operating budget. And that's how I think for 4 years in a row in DPW we were able to work within a 0% increase. It's not always just zero steady. We do increase some things, but because he does things like that, we decrease things to offset our increased requests. So good job, and thank you for coming, and that's really why you're here. And
Thank you, John.
if there is,
I would have sent you flowers if I knew that's why you were sitting here the whole
Yeah.
time.
and as I talk a little bit about this new vehicle request, if there's any technical questions on what it's replacing, why it's replacing it, or what this new new vehicle is going to afford us to do that I can't answer, I would surely defer to John. But basically, as Tom referenced earlier, the vehicle that we're looking to pull out of the fleet and we'll put to auction is a 1994 vehicle that does not nearly have the capabilities that this new vehicle we're going to purchase does. Primarily, we use that 1994 out there on the road, and it's basically limited to just some live load work in the field, but it really doesn't have the dump body that we like to have. It's not as expanded as far as its capabilities as the new one does, which is expected. It's 24 years old. If this vehicle is approved with the 2017 monies to keep it out of debt service, we would forego the purchase of the Mason dump in 19. But we have the other vehicles in there that we would keep, and then we would just bump some of the things down, and we would talk about that at year end, the vehicles. But you saw all that already, so I'm not going to go all over that again. But basically, it's a 1994 that we call Highway 13, and we're looking to replace it with the 17 Chevrolet 7500, which is not a big 10-wheel dump like you see. We have one of those and a couple of the big 6-wheelers. It's a little larger than the Mason dumps, but a little smaller than the 10-wheelers, and it's really the optimum vehicle you want. Particularly, I think someone referenced earlier the smaller roads and a lot of utility work and the maneuverability and stuff like that that we're looking to secure. So thank you for that consideration.
Does anybody have any questions for Paul?
Thank you.
No, I just a request, it's just easier. I'm more of a visual person, not to take more time. Honestly, it's just, I don't know trucks. I mean, I have the same problem with the fire. It's really easier if somebody just sends me a JPEG. I mean, just take a pic and send it on. I'll open up my iPhone. It's just easier to look at things and say, oh, okay, I get it. And as soon as you say 19 anything, I know it's too old. So it's not like I'm not arguing with you. It'd just be nice. Sometimes people ask, well, they need to do that, whatever. It's just nice to know what we're looking at. So.
Well, again, he does a good job keeping stuff on the road, but whether you realize it or not, this board in the last 4 years has probably purchased at least 7 pieces of heavy major equipment, I'll call it, either a large truck or we have a new backhoe and new appurtenances to that really help the guys in the road, and they appreciate it. And you see the turnaround in the work product. So thank you for that.
And I'd like a picture of every piece of equipment to put with my fixed asset records.
Yeah. No, you know what? I get audited and I now have to have pictures because everybody has an iPhone, so I'm asked in my audits where I work to show pictures, even if it's a catalog picture. It's like a new thing now. So yay.
But because Paul said, Tom, this would replace that lime green truck with the rails on the side, and that's how I knew what it was.
Excellent.
But,
Definitely send you a picture of that, 'cause it looks like it'd be a parade.
Exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Tom. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
And thank you, John, for spending an evening with us, but more importantly, for saving us so much money and doing such great work for the village for so many years.
Okie dokie. We're moving right through this agenda. Another checkmark.
Okay, so Debbie, I do want to take note of the fact that it's after 10:30. We've covered some really big issues tonight, and I don't begrudge us 1 minute of the time that we spent on some really important stuff. However, as I look at this, are there, of the remaining items, we have boards and committees application process, warming station discussion, and policy regarding interns, and then also not even listed on here, but I know it's brief, but it is time sensitive, is the cabaret licenses, and there's a couple that are up for discussion. So are there any items here that you feel would be better served if we waited until people were less tired or less rushed? Or are there pieces of these discussions that really should, at least pieces that should be brought to our attention tonight?
So the boards and committee discussion is maybe 5 minutes. The warming station discussion I put on here because I was asked to do that so that we could have a conversation in light of the last snowstorm that we had. That's something that we could defer if.
It is seasonally sensitive, so.
Right, and then the interns, again, we could put that off to the next work session, but that's at your pleasure.
Well, we were trying to move it up as quickly as we could, so, but it's relevant, it's response to your request.
Sure, I know you're working on this for tonight. If we do go over it tonight, do you have
I don't have anything in,
policy to
I don't have a
first-
policy to give to you tonight. I have discussion, but I can have a policy to discuss and have something for you. What is our next work session?
Are you telling me that kind of everything on here is a 5-minute discussion and we can be done at 11 o'clock?
Maybe.
There's just one other thing.
Okay.
There's one other thing that's not on there.
We're not famous for that.
There's one
I
other.
was trying to challenge us. So that
We have the IFCA contract that we need to talk about, but you have.
Wonder
Yeah,
why.
we would do that last.
wait, do we have advice of counsel or executive session? Okay, so we'll do IFCA last, and then Quantel gets to go home and enjoy himself. Or go out.
It's not even, where is that on here? It's not even on here.
All right,
A young man.
so let me just start with boards and committees, very, very quick.
Okay.
So we had talked about doing a different policy where we advertise for the different boards and committees, and now that we have new regulations in place, so there's be more transition in the boards and committees, that we would actually put a process together where in September, we would advertise everything that was coming up at the end of the year, we would get all of the applications in, and then we could sit collectively and decide, how you want, what you wanted to do with the applicants. I put together an application form, which I have sent out to everyone. And really, I just want to make sure that you guys are okay with that, because I'd like to get it on our website so that people can, if you get someone that says, I'm interested in this committee, you just sort of send them and they'll fill out the application and.
So I responded to that because I didn't know if it was just our appointeds or your appointeds or
All-
both.
all
Because the
boards.
form doesn't actually,
Well, it allows you to pick up to 4 different committees that you would like to serve on.
so it doesn't matter to the, right, okay, got
It
it.
doesn't matter, but I think that what it gives us is flexibility, so as more and more people are excited about serving our village, then we can start seeing what is their preference, so their number 1, 2, 3, or 4 preference. Maybe somebody doesn't get their first preference, but they get their second or third, and it just gives us some flexibility, but we do it at the end of the year.
So, just off the cusp, have you ever been convicted of a crime?
Right, now that's something for you to decide.
That's something.
Ban the box.
Ban the box, like, I just think we could just throw that question off the application.
That's fine.
And typically.
Quantel, your mic's not on. Ban the box.
Ban the box, that's.
I'm with you.
All right, can we do a village-wide policy just in general, or do we have that?
Not tonight.
Not tonight, okay, not tonight.
I'll
All right.
do a memo, but yeah.
Okay, cool.
There you go for 5 minutes, okay.
And then quickly, just for me personally, things like this, like forums like this, like now that we said ban the box, like if there wasn't the conviction question, typically that's not something I don't feel we would have to go over. That's just me personally. I just wanted to.
Actually, this is the first step in our job, which is interviewing and recommending and appointing them.
Understandable, but the
And we're
actual
changing the policy.
Yeah, but the actual application itself, like I just don't.
But if she had just put it on the website, we'd be asking people about their criminal offenses.
Exactly. So
which is why it's important that we do
I
this.
just said, just with the exception of banning the box, going forward, these are things that can possibly
Debbie
be
had no
streamlined.
idea that was going to be an issue for us.
Right.
let's keep it moving, because I really prefaced that conversation
So
just
I'll be
now.
happy to remove that question.
Thank you.
I just have a cool question. Could this be an online form?
Yes, online.
Sorry, I'm not used to this in
Fillable.
Austining, so thank
Yeah,
you.
It's so cool. New website. New website.
No, I have to, no,
Very
I'm embracing it,
So-
I'm
so
embracing it.
I guess my question is, we
It
do
is.
have a few people that are still, they're already, that they're like, we just interviewed somebody last week, we're still getting emails. People can, what we're trying to do is focus our attention on this in the fourth quarter of the year going forward, particularly as most of our boards are pretty well appointed at this point. But
they
there
are.
are a few
There's a few
where we have
openings.
expired terms and we have one opening left here or there, or somebody drops off. So people can apply at this point, but eventually we want to get to a point where we're just focusing it on the fourth quarter.
That is correct.
And as soon as this is up on the website, then the new approach will be when somebody says, yeah, I'm kind of interested in applying for a board commission, we say, go on the website where there's that little I'm raising my hand thing, they're gonna get this online form to fill out,
Right.
plus all the links to learn about what they are, and so they
Yes.
can choose their favorites. Okay.
I think it'll be a great process, and it'll make it a lot easier for us to schedule interviews for you later on in the year.
All right, so just two things. I'd like to grandfather the people who've already submitted, because
Sure.
I'm not putting them
think
through.
there's
It's
two or three.
silly.
Yep.
Number two, I guess three things. There should be a, like, so it says process, but you're really asking about a form, a beginning of a process, right? I mean, I know the goal is last quarter, like, you have this many days, right, everybody? And then we interview, we make decisions, so there's gotta be a date line associated with this
Right.
process. And lastly, so if I don't have an iPhone or a computer, where are people gonna go to do this? Like, do we say somewhere? Do we tell them? Does our staff know that they could go to the library? And there's a computer, and there's like an instruction, something for it will be a decreasing percentage in our population, but something still should be available for those people.
People who don't have computers do know that they can use computers at the library, but there's no reason why we couldn't have hard copies
Yeah.
available
At the
at
clerk's
Fields Village
office, the
Hall,
rec.
or, yeah, so.
It's a minor
Absolutely.
detail, 'cause
Yeah.
I think,
But we do
you
want it
know,
to be
it's a
accessible
decreasing
wherever,
number
yes.
in our community, or in any community, but still, it's a number.
Right. Yep.
Great.
Good, okay.
Otherwise,
See,
yay.
I told you.
And all the forms, even online, are supposed to have revision date, REV.
Oh, yeah, they will.
Colon, dates, so that we know when things are done, updated, et cetera.
All right.
Got it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, that was like 5 minutes.
I
I
told
can tell you how long
5
it was, I
minutes.
timed it.
Warming stations, I put it on here because I was asked to do that. I'm really not sure what the conversation is.
Oh, well, Omar, do you want to introduce it? Because it was
Sure,
in response to one of
sure,
your questions.
yeah,
And
yeah.
we've had some side conversations about exactly what it is,
So historically, within the last two superintendents of Park and Recreation, but mainly the one that was there for a while, and I'm not saying that we have to continue to embrace such a philosophy, so that's why we're discussing it tonight, is that the rec center was never a place that closed. That it was always there for people in need for various circumstances and emergencies. So usually, what has been going on there is that the superintendent and or the village manager in the past have a plan to keep the building open. So regardless of whether the governor or the county or Mayor Garrity declares an emergency, there's a contingency plan at the building to keep the building open under these circumstances which we're discussing. It would usually be inclement weather, heat wave, code blue, which I encourage the public and you guys to look up. It's when temperatures drop below zero, and if you're outside for like 5 minutes, we just had it. It usually happens like once a year or twice a year if we're that lucky, and that's where Ossining residents would be able. In the past, they were confined to the game room during operational hours, and if you had an ID card, you were able, if you had a way to get there, which is a different conversation. While schools were closed, the pool would still be open as well, as it has been open the past past couple years. But our email to our colleagues came about inclement weather and it being cold. and the response was that it's only for emergencies, right? So I guess the conversation would then be, does the village no longer offer a warming site for cold and warm weather? I think I summarized that well.
So this is my understanding from in the last 5+ years. The community center is the emergency center that you're referencing. So if there's ever a significant power outage, or it could be a fire, it doesn't have to be weather related, where there needs to be a gathering space for people that are displaced for any reason, or that need shelter for some reason, that the community center is that place, and it's equipped with a generator, it's equipped with cots, and that's really why the superintendent, when we have one, is part of the Office of Emergency Management meetings, because that is their job during, they are the emergency shelter place for our community. The community center closed most recently when we were encouraging people to stay off the roads. So it wouldn't be open the way it normally would be, because we didn't want anybody going out because they wanted to take a swim or go to their basketball program. We wanted them to stay home and stay off the roads for their safety and everybody's safety. So that's why it was closed from a programmatic perspective. It has been identified in recent years on a couple of occasions as it's open as an emergency shelter because there have been major power outages, and we want to make sure that people have a place to go. For example, when it comes to a heat wave, there's no reason that it would close. We don't tell people to not go out on the road because it's hot, so it would be open. But it's never been open on Sundays.
You know,
So I'm just saying, but it's not open every day. But like if you're in the middle of 5 days in a row at 90 degrees, the community center is not open on Sundays, and it hasn't been. In fact, it might be next year, I hope, for some programming anyway. But if it's just cold and there's not snow, or it's just hot, and we haven't changed to being open on Sundays, it hasn't traditionally been available as a warming center or a cooling center.
Well, no, I mean, I have documentation from, I could actually prove this, that we have been a warming center.
Yeah.
It's just, I'll have to look for it now and maybe ask some people to write to us, but.
Do you mean it's been a warming center, meaning we don't?
Non-emergency.
But do you mean it has opened as a warming center on days when it would otherwise be closed, or do you mean anybody is welcome to come in whether we have a rec pass or
I
not?
would say both. So if there's a determination, or we don't have to call it code blue, but if we know that it's going to drop below 0 tonight, and they're encouraging everyone not to be outside, and communities are doing an action plan, or already have an action plan what to do when that happens, the rare times that it does occur, then we would have an action plan. However, now we're talking about an action plan. Usually the rec superintendent would just, they would coordinate it with the village manager, and, staff would be there.
Wasn't the last thing because the governor actually declared it, and one of the things, he was on for like an hour, one of the things is that the employees are not there. So who's?
Well, you would need a plan to have an employee in those times when the governor or the county or the village, whatever entity does call. If there is a determination for a need to temporarily, I don't want to call it house or have people in the building, you would have a plan for what staff member stays there. That's usually what happens. You would actually have to have a plan. All right, cool. So when Manager McDonald issues an order that we are closed, however, it is -10 degrees outside, and there's a plan for who stays in the building and who does that. I would really.
Stay.
I don't want to.
Exactly. I don't understand how this works. He made this whole big point, the governor, about the employees should stay home. They don't get paid. They're like the paid. And there was this whole thing because it's the homeless shelters around the state. It's the civil servants. It's the count. He had this whole. That's.
Well, that's for a snowstorm. That's for a snowstorm.
That's what it was last time, right? That's the
Right, no.
snowstorm, yeah.
We're talking about in general about the opening of a warming shelter, not just for particularly inclement weather, but any weather scenario in addition to emergency scenarios, if that makes sense.
So if we had something in place, whatever it was, a week ago, whenever we closed the community center, and because there was a storm, are you proposing that the village should find a way so that the community center can be open as a warming center, even if we are discouraging people for coming for programmatic reasons, but that we should be providing it as a warming center because it was cold?
Yes, if we have the determination that's based off of facts, if we know that they're warning everyone not to be outside for more than 5 minutes because of a deep freeze, then yes, that's an appropriate determination to keep a facility open, as why it's been done for the past like 15 years at that rec center. You may only get 5-10 people, but it would be part of your communication that you would do prior to a storm. I know that right now only the police department speaks on behalf of the whole village when it comes to storm management, and then you do it extremely well in your emails and Facebook, but it would have to be a comprehensive way to address that, given that we are aware of what circumstances and situations we're dealing with at the present time, if they're available to us.
Are there, we did talk about this in OEM, and one of the questions I had is, and then all the first responders there are sort of weighing in on their reflections on how it has been handled in the past. One of the questions I had is, what are the guidelines for a municipality of our size, a village? What is the expectation? What is the municipality's responsibility? And what are the best practices for us to be able to address the kind of situations that Trustee Herrera is bringing up? Do we have any recommendations from NICOM or from other entities?
I have not had an opportunity to do that research yet.
Okay.
So I just want to weigh in. This is like going on my 3rd year, but I do recall in the past the community center being a warming center. It's not, it kind of has always been like the. So that being said, like it's like typically speaking, like in any municipality, particularly similar to Ossining in densely populated areas, there is some place that one can go. I think really what what it is that even though we may have most of our employees go home, that we're just saying that 1 or 2 remain at the rec center. We can look in best practices, but I would be for having the rec be a warming center and a cooling station. Like there needs to be, for example, Snowden. There was apartments in Snowden that were without heat. Could you, if they have family, could you go to a family? Yeah, you could. But if you don't, where are you gonna go so that it won't be frigid in your apartment? Like we do have instances here in this, in this village where people are without heat for periods of time, and we want people to be warm. I mean, it's a community center. I mean, in its name. So, I don't want to belabor this. I thought it was something that was done previously. And
it has definitely been identified as a warming center or in a cooling center, so that people know if you need to get out of the 90-degree heat that's happening again today, or if you need to get out of your, even if you have a home but it's just not well heated and you can't afford to keep it heated for the whole day, that you can go to the community center. The question is, can you go to the community center if it is not otherwise open?
That's our question, right? Our determination. I mean, we could decide for whatever reason that we just want to offer that during operating hours, unless after we do some research, unless it's an emergency that we have to open after hours, there's a fire or a natural disaster, or. But yeah, that's part of the conversation. But as of right now, I'm not trying to add any additional hours or days. I mean, that's overall for the rec, we're trying to do that. But for this conversation, it's just if you can go to the rec. We close up at 9, 10 o'clock now.
So the rec center is open from 6 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night,
Monday to Friday.
Monday through Saturday. So
Yeah, that's great.
so it's the rare occasion where we have the storm that we had where we closed down. That's the rare occasion.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's open, and we do have people that come in and just observe some of the the recreation stuff that's going on, but they don't partake in the recreation. They just
They need a
come in.
space, and it's a safe space for people.
I did talk with the library, and probably more people go there than go to the rec center, because there's things to do at the library. They can play on the computers, and they can, go sit in the basement where the old cafeteria was, and things like that. So it seems like more people go there than the 1 or 2 occasional people that come to the rec center. So it is open all of those hours anyway. And, you know, our hope is that we can find programming for Sunday so that it would be open 7 days a week for multiple hours.
All right, so I guess
I just want to position ourselves
yeah, so
to.
I think
Only
this
done
is,
once for an emergency.
so I think, I guess, and don't let me speak for you too much and just chime in, but like, let's set the parameters of, number one, if we're gonna be a warming and cooling station, like what, if we wanted to be 24 hours during this particular period of time where, you know, temperatures are, you know, -5, what are those parameters? Like, at what point are we gonna say that we are a warming and cooling station? And then we're trustees, so at some point, we have to budget.
By 24 hours? So you're gonna hire and pay personnel to be there for 24 hours?
So to my point, Rika, to my point, because what I just said, what I was finishing saying was that if we want to budget for that and we want to be mindful for that when we go into budget season, then these are some of the policies that we can discuss. So if I'm adding too much, Omar, just, you know, let me know, but I think that's where the conversation is going, or what we need to decide.
Yeah, we need the parameters. So before, the village operated it without any parameters or policy or understanding or PR, or people just kind of spread the word amongst themselves and whoever knew about it. We don't operate that way on this board. We actually talk about what we're going to do and publicize it and talk to a manager. And I'm going to forward you guys, and please do any further investigation on this about the Code Blue alert, or and what they use to determine when that has to be, because when that is, we don't have to call it that, but let's just say warming center alert or whatever we call it.
Yeah.
I mean, that would go out as an emergency web blast. That would go out. I mean,
Yes, please send it so we understand.
I'm
like,
not
what are
saying
the
that
conditions
I'm
when
not saying that we have to use their model, but it's very similar to what Trustee
No, but we
Bazemore.
don't need to reinvent the wheel. If there's
Correct.
recommendations that exist, we want to understand what they are.
And in our case, because where we are, you know, I can't do an accurate prediction, but maybe the most out of 365 days a year we'll be open 8-9 days, whether it's during operational hours, maybe once we have an event that requires us, you know, God forbid, to stay open the whole, you know, but the parameters. I do, though, I understand why the library is more popular. They have a fireplace. I do believe that our rec center is also as comfortable and nicer and bigger and better. So I do want to position the community center to be a place where you go, not just for programming, but when you're in need of, and don't take me out of context when I say that, when it comes to weather.
Okay.
And especially since it's right in the heart of downtown and it's an urban setting, people walk there.
Thanks. I think we have a little bit more of an understanding on what it is that you're asking about, and you'll circulate the Code Blue, and you'll find some more of the recommended ways to approach it. All right. That was, by the way, 10 minutes over our 5-minute goal, so moving on.
So,
Policy
the
regarding
interns, do we
interns.
want to have that conversation?
Well, Stuart, you did some research for us?
Hi.
Hi, Stuart.
Just, I will keep really brief on this, I promise. Yeah, I can do it. Here we go. No, gotta get us back on track. NICOM NICOM's very strong suggestion is that there be a policy which delineates specifically what the interns are supposed to do, what their requirements are and what their obligations are. I think, you know, that's a matter that the board has to discuss in terms of if they're looking for interns. It's different than, for example, my intern, because as a department head, I know what that person's going to be doing, and I, you know, hire that person to do what they have to do. For interns that are going to work for trustees, individually, group, or whatever, it's really more, the decision has to be from the trustees' end as to what you want of that person. I believe, Trustee Herrera, you said last time, it's not going to be a paid position. It's going to be a credit position, academic the real information then is what, from the academic institution, what are they looking for that has to be signed off on. If it is again, as I said last time, if it's a seasonal person, it's a 4-month hire. If it is, and they go for 4 months, and then if it's within the same calendar year, you can't use the same person again. And basically, it's just a matter of developing a policy that, if what that person is going to do, what resources that person may or may not require, and just knowing who's in essence in charge of that person, which is also important. Because I believe it was indicated it's not going to be a quote-unquote individual's retaining. It would be a village determination, but you would interview whoever you want and whoever else wants to do it. So I'm happy to work on something, sort of a policy to show you folks, to develop in that particular regard. There's not much on it. I checked NICOM, they don't actually have policies on these kind of things. They have policies on virtually everything else, but not that. But the key things are really, in essence, job description. What is it that you're going to want this particular person to do? For how long you're going to want the person to do it. If they're seasonal, there's no time limitation in terms of how much. But actually, if they're getting academic credit, they may require that they put in X number of hours a week in order to get that credit. And basically, who's going to be responsible for that person. Those are really the things that have to be discussed in terms of really what you want. Otherwise, it's just a matter of, I think, having something definite, because again, unlike a department head, it's not really a department. It's sort of, does the trustee want to have someone who will assist them with whatever that trustee wants, but it's just developing that particular type of policy. So I'm happy to work toward that. But as I said, the one thing that the folks at NICOM said to me was, you really want to have your board on board with a policy in terms of dealing with their interns, as compared to if DPW were to bring someone in, or the law department. Specifically, if the board wants to have somebody, what do they see that particular person or persons doing? That's the most important thing, because it's that job description that will be important in terms of, can they get their academic credit? Because if they're just putting paper away, it's probably not going to work. But if they're actually doing something, going out into the community or doing certain things, that's really where it is. So, and that's what the policy is needed.
Does it need to clarify things like what they're privy to and?
Well, that goes to what they're going to be doing. So, what could they attend? What information could they see? They are in essence an employee, but they're an unpaid employee as an intern. But there are certain issues in terms of matters that may be discussed that they should not be privileged to, and that's something that I think has to be in there. And it's an overarching policy in the sense that each one of you, if you decide to have somebody, could have them do something slightly different. But again, if they're doing it particularly, if they're doing for credit, you need to know what that institution wants them to do to earn that credit, because that's the important thing, because you will be required either monthly or at the end of the semester to sign off that they have in fact done that. And that becomes important, because that's the only way they're going to get the credit. Because again, as I said last time, if they're not getting paid, they must get academic credit, because we can't have someone here who is not getting academic credit.
So if the person is, if we're designing this just for academic credit to be the compensation, do they need to deal with the personnel office?
They would still have to file an application. They would still have to go through all that. It's not as necessarily as strict through the county civil service, but the answer is yes. They would still have to go through. They would have to. They would need an application over there. It would have to all go through. Everything would all Ts crossed and Is dotted, yeah. It's not just, you just bring somebody in and you get them to work. They would have to go through the process.
There's like background checks and everything? Although if they're under 18, they're,
I don't know the answer to that. I mean,
so you'll figure that
I mean, the intern that I have, who is not doing it for academic credit, she's getting paid, but again, my understanding from discussions with Linda McMahon is that person would still have to fill out applications. In other words, they would, you know.
As they should.
As they should,
Yeah.
because you want to have a record of who that individual is.
And then if you're doing it for academic credit, whatever the process is to go with the university, would this lay out if that's done by us, if it's done by a staff member, or?
Well, what a lot of places have is that, for example, if I were to have an intern who was getting academic credit from a law school, I, as the supervisor, would have to be the one to sign off that the person did that particular work. And most law schools actually require that on twice a month. You would actually have to sign and say what they've done, so that they can do that. Same situation here, and that will depend on the individual school. Okay, in other words, and how that program is developed, as to who's the person who has to actually sign off at the end of the time.
Okay.
So I'll put that together.
If I may. Stuart, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. I just wanted to, so you're going to do basically a checklist for us of that any new hire for credit, right? In my case, which, by the way, I did submit the actual duties and responsibilities 6 weeks ago, so shouldn't be a question. It has been sent, but I'll re-forward it to you.
Please, are you looking mainly at high school, or are you looking at?
I'm looking at so I'm looking at as it says here, high school seniors and up. Yeah.
Fine.
So numerous programs can actually qualify to actually be a part of it. The only appropriate office within the village that I think is appropriate that I, or let's say Mary Garrity has an intern, would be your office, the office of our village manager. I just don't see any other office really having, it being appropriate to oversight of anything. I'd be more than happy to include you in assignments and summaries, and even if I had to sign it, that's where the accountability comes in. To make sure that we have a program that's actually a program. But also, the reason why you didn't find a lot of information on it is because besides it having to only be for credit, it's a pretty simple process. There's not really much else to it. It's what you make of the intern and what you make of the program for yourself. So even if there was a standard, I could propose one that's completely opposite, that's that. I look forward to meeting with the OHS career department and guidance counselors, and hopefully finding someone there for a week or month, depending on how it goes, and then I have some appointments that I hope to make once we have a policy at some colleges. But the draft program, which I have here, which is the only exception that I made, back to Trustee Levin's point, was I had a part where it said reading, tracking, and responding to correspondence. I had to change it to reading, tracking, and responding to non-privileged correspondence. So, I would have to send it and, all that stuff. So it's pretty simple. Whoever's going to be the intern, they're definitely going to have an experience from research and writing in the field. So yeah, do you have any questions? You made a Victoria Garrity face, so.
It's getting late.
but it's a practice done in a lot of communities, and that's about it. So I look forward to hopefully having a policy that we could vote on, for I could get someone.
Got it.
Thank you.
Moving on to cabaret license. Sit. We have a couple new cabaret license.
And this is actually time sensitive.
Yeah. Right. Folks, January and December are the months where we've been getting all the applications in for cabaret licenses. 2 have now actually been fully vetted, and so I would like to put resolutions on for February 7th. First is Good Choice Kitchens. This is their initial cabaret license, and they were approved both by fire department, by building department, and by police department.
Too many rowdy vegans, huh?
So That's right. What they propose, just so you know, is mostly live music during the evenings, and they're also applying for a beer and wine permit, which they have not, a license, which they have not yet received. But they're looking to put that stuff in, so that's there. The other location is the Atlantic Bar, which has had a cabaret license in the past. They are at 84 Croton. Building department checked, and they fully passed. When I got the completed application back from Anne Marie Rocco, it was 184 pages, and most of those were police reports. Most of those police reports involve an alarm going off, or things like that. There were a couple of, assaults, but outside the bar, but the police reports of the location. So Chief Sylvester said to me, nothing more than in the past when they have granted, when the board has granted cabaret licenses to this location. It's just, in his words, the nature of the business. But they are proposing, they look for a cabaret refreshment coin-op. Only the cabaret requires board approval, and they have had a cabaret license in the past. As I said, most of the police reports deal with alarms that have just gone off, doors open, or something like that. So, and I have them all, but I did not bring them here. And I would ask to put a resolution before the board on the 7th of February to grant the cabaret licenses to these two locations. And as I said, the building department and police are starting to get through these. I think there are about a total of about 28. Well, they're not, 33 license applications have been filed, but I think only about 10 are cabaret licenses. We have laundromat licenses and all these other things. So, but these are the first two of the cabarets to come through. So, I'd like to just get that, if it's okay with the board, put these before the board and get these licenses taken care of.
Question?
Yeah.
What are the hours of operation, please?
For Atlantic Bar, he has till 3:30 a.m. It would have to be shortened because we don't, our code.
We don't do 3:30.
We don't, he also has 4 a.m. on other days, so we don't do that. So he would get.
So he would be consistent with any of the other cabaret licenses.
Exactly correct. He would be,
Yeah, if you could just look it up, it's actually not our code, it's just to be consistent with our current practices.
Yeah, which is what we've done.
Yeah.
When applicants in the past have asked for hours that go beyond our time, beyond the time, we have basically defaulted down to what is the time that is provided in the code.
So let's, can you write it up to just be consistent with whatever the
Yes,
others are? And if they, for
absolutely.
some reason, say, I really want to have guitars on Thursday at 6 p.m., and that's earlier than we had it set up, then we can look at that if it's not going to be
He'll be, we'll do it,
problematic.
we'll do it consistent with what we have in our code, absolutely.
Well, no, because it's not consistent with what we have in our code.
Right.
It's consistent with what we have been granting to other businesses, which is more curtailed than we have in our code in deference to the police request that after a certain point, the.
Diminishing returns.
Yes, thank you, that's the term I was looking for.
Well, actually, what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna look at what their.
Easy to say, do it like
I'm gonna
everybody
look at what their license
Two
was
instead of
last year.
three.
Yeah.
I'll look at
Whatever it
last
was
year's.
last year
But
is.
last year's, it would be the
Like-
same
like-
situation.
Well, what
By
I would
2
do is
a.m.,
I
it's like-
would check with Kevin.
Yeah.
A little
And
too
check
far
the times of all the other cabaret licenses.
That's what I will do. That's
That's
that we
what I
can
would
do.
request.
Comes
That's
an
fine.
exponential
It's consistent.
police
Got it.
reporting at that point. Okay, great. That was the only one that's been under 5 minutes. Can we say goodnight to Mr. Bazemore?
Good night, sir.
Good night, Trustee Bazemore.
With my revised internship program. I really appreciate it.
I sent him an email,
Good.
nobody asked about it.
And after all that stuff I print,
You can take it,
Your
man.
envelope of mail?
pictures I looked
Is
at.
that your real
Oh, no,
estate
it's,
newspaper?
no, it's just the newspaper from outside.
Oh,
Good night, good night.
Good night now, take care.
yes. And the confusing information about ATPA in the article. No, just tired. Crossing my arms.
We have a, last on the agenda is a contract with IFCA. We have had this for several years. They do all of our affordable housing management for us in the various locations, and I got the paper that tells me all of the different units that we have. We have about 38 units. I think it's about 38.
There's 47. Oh, but they don't do all of them because they don't do
They don't do all
Avalon,
of them,
right, okay.
correct. This is the different services that they provide, so it's not necessarily, if we don't use those services, obviously we don't pay for them. Most of the units now are leased up, and so some of the provisions here, as far as if there's a turnover in a tenant, then we would pay them to find a new tenant and income qualify them, and make sure that the apartment unit is still being offered at affordable rates to income qualified families. So this went originally to someone else, didn't go to me, even though it was addressed to me, and so when we saw it, we said, I went and met with Karen, Stuart and I went down, and Lynn, and we just talked through everything so that I could fully understand it. I think these are normal cost. I don't think that they're out of line as far as the amount of money for the contract. I just would like to get it on the agenda for approval, so that we don't miss anything with them.
I think I just sent an email because I didn't have a perspective of whether it's a lot more than previous years, or it's flat to a previous year, or.
It's, pardon?
Oh, you don't have it, sorry, sorry.
No, I
Yeah,
just, I asked.
so, I mean, there's,
that.
it's,
That would be
it's,
helpful.
um,
Not that whether
I can
it's
look.
reasonable or not, because I believe
It's a
that they
menu.
I don't think that they, it's a
men-
menu of prices.
It's a menu of prices for services that they do, and now that all the apartments are leased up, the only chance that we would be using their services is if somebody moved out, or if somebody became not
Right.
qualified,
So that's
or,
not
Right,
even.
so they do an annual
So it-
income
it-
qualification.
yeah, so it's really, it's an
that's
à la
cool.
carte,
Wait, no,
it's an à la
but,
carte
except
arrangement.
Debbie is saying something.
So they do an annual income qualification, so everywhere, just like a Section 8, we have to go.
Less or more, right?
Correct. And so they do that. It's, the fee for that is $250 per unit. So that's very reasonable for the amount of time that they put in, to go meet with the homeowner or the, renter and, you know, do all that. And if we put new units on, so we do have some development projects, it does talk about the leasing up. And that cost is a little bit more significant, but it's actually a lot of work for them because they do a broad stroke and, announcement that there's going to be all these units available, then there's a ton of applications come in, they have to
All
sort
the
through them.
vetting, yeah.
And so it, when we talked it through, I feel very comfortable that these are very reasonable rates. And I'm very grateful for the service they provide us in managing this. So, if it's all right with you, I'd like to put it on the agenda for approval.
Sounds great.
That's all I have for tonight, Madam Mayor.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
With that, we look forward to seeing you next, no, in 2 weeks. Next week is a fifth Wednesday. Bye, guys. I'll see you in 2 weeks. On February 7th. Okay, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
We don't have visitor recognition.